And we're ready to go, Madam Mayor.
Do I wait for... Is YouTube going, is it?
Yes, it is. You're ready to go now, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, councillors, officers and residents. Today, in accordance with our multi-faith approach to these things, I'd like to introduce Alistair Emblem, who is representing St John's Roman Catholic Church in Farnham. He is the coordinator of prayer for formation and evangelization at the church. And I would like to ask him to lead the council in a moment of reflection. The format for this will be a short reading, then a short break to reflect, and then a final prayer. Alistair, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Jolly good. Well, thank you for inviting me to give this moment of reflection. And I want to begin by thanking all of you for what you do on behalf of the inhabitants of Waverley. I imagine that the feedback you normally get is probably criticism. I'm sure it's not all justified, but you may not hear much gratitude. So a sincere thank you for all your work. The reading I've chosen for this evening is from the first letter of St. Peter, chapter 5. All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favour to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Now, that line about God showing favour to the humble is a quotation from the book of Proverbs in the Bible. And another verse from Proverbs says, with humility comes wisdom. We desperately need wisdom, don't we? We're living in an age where there's massive amounts of information and data and exalted levels of knowledge and expertise. But to quote T.S. Eliot, where is the wisdom we have lost with knowledge? And where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? Yes, we desperately need wisdom. But where does wisdom come from? Well, as we heard in Proverbs just now, with humility comes wisdom. True humility is having an attitude that acknowledges our dependence on God and opens the heart to receive God's wisdom. So as we heard earlier, clothe yourselves with humility, humble yourselves under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up, and cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. So let's just have a moment of silence, reflecting on what we've heard, and then I'll say a short prayer. So, my prayer is this. May Almighty God grant you true humility of heart, that you may acknowledge your need for his wisdom. May he pour out upon you his spirit of wisdom and understanding, his spirit of prudence and discernment, that you may be guided by his principles of truth and justice in your debate and in your decisions. And may you cast all your anxiety upon him, allowing him to lift you up and to fill you with his love and peace. And I ask this in the name of our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Emblem. that was very useful and a good guide for the way we should conduct ourselves today. Thank you. You don't have to stay for all the rest of the thing, but please do if you wish. Thank you. Informal question time. There are no informal questions. I would like to welcome members and the public to this meeting. Members are supported this evening by the Chief Executive, Tom Horwood, Strategic Director, Ali Wrighton, the Head of Policy and Governance, Robin Taylor, the Borough Solicitor, Daniel Bainbridge, and the Democratic Services Manager, Fiona Cameron. Members, please use the hand raise feature in Zoom to indicate you wish to speak. If you lose your connection, please rejoin as quickly as you can. If anyone feels it would help their internet connection to shut off the video, then please do so. If the live stream of YouTube fails, we will pause proceedings and wait for that to be re-established. Before we move to the next item, for practical reasons, I'm waiving Council Rule 21.1, the requirement for members to stand while they speak. Now move to the minutes of the council meetings held on the 22nd of July and the 11th of August 2020. Members, does anyone have an issue with the accuracy of the minutes? Members, would you please unmute your microphone and indicate your agreement to the minutes of the meetings held on the 22nd of July and the 11th of August?
Agreed.
Thank you. I will sign these later. Apologies for absence. Robin Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've received apologies from councillors Val Henry, Daniel Hunt and Stephen Mulliner.
Thank you. Declaration of interests. Robin Taylor, have there been any declarations prior to the meeting?
None received in advance, Madam Mayor.
Are there any declarations by members? Right, we move straight to Mayor's announcements. Now, usually this is a time when the Mayor reports on a few of very many things that she has managed or he has managed to attend during the time. And of course, during this time of COVID, I have had a very quiet time. I have been Zooming around the place, but I haven't actually attended any outdoor activity. I've been to the Ahmadiyya lecture on Muhammad, which was recently given, and I gave the thanks. But I have actually been ticking over. First of all, I'd like to have a quick word about discrimination. Back in May this year, when the tragic case of George Floyd was fresh in everyone's mind, as Mayor, I issued a statement, Black Lives Matter, which contained the following words: "We will consider and reflect on how we can do more to make a difference, and will outline the steps we will take towards this shortly." One of our younger residents has been in lots of correspondence with me. We've been talking about things, and one of the things that she said in one of the emails was, "I am particularly interested in the steps that you stated that are to be taken by Waverley Council to address inequality and injustice in our own borough." We have continued our correspondence since then, but I thought you would like to know yourselves some background of which I have happened on so far. Waverley has many anti-discrimination procedures in place, which have helped tackle problems in all areas of equality in the borough. And one such working group is the Corporate Equality Working Group. This has been in existence for more than 10 years, but recently refreshed its membership last year in the light of changing times. The focus of the group is to foster an inclusive culture at Waverley and to support Waverley's management and staff in achieving their responsibilities related to equality, diversity and inclusion in delivering services and managing people. It has already achieved many things, but one of the things that it did do recently was in response to the question that the young resident asked, was that in response to the George Floyd incident, a subgroup has been set up to break down issues about racism in Waverley. I myself have asked to join the group, and I hope to do two things there. The first is to learn more about the existing structures, but also to learn more about what next steps need to be taken in order to monitor and improve our approach. So I will carry on, hopefully, and learn a lot by, and I hope the group will meet soon and I can report back to you on what they say. The second thing I'd like to talk to you about is a new pilot scheme that's going to be running here in Waverley and in Guildford, where a pioneering reconnections pilot ran from 2015 to 2020, and it's led by Age UK in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, so it was run in Herefordshire and Worcestershire. There they worked in partnership with local organisations to reduce loneliness, especially in those above 65. They brought together skills and experience from the community to provide mutually supportive and person-centred service for older people with the aim of hand-holding and helping until individuals gained enough confidence to stand alone. During the lifetime of the project, Reconnections have received over 3,000 referrals and engaged with over 1,600 older people. On average, clients received about 6 months of support from the service and then were able to make up the new connections that they've made, take up the new connections they've made on their own. After 5 years of tackling loneliness in Hereford and Worcester, the pilot reconnection service has now been completed there. And I think that our residents are very lucky that they are now moving this pioneer approach to supporting older adults and addressing loneliness to the boroughs of Waverley and Guildford. They are hoping to start their work with a kick-off meeting in late October and early November, depending on the weather, as it has to be outside. So I will report back to you on that too and watch this space. I'm sure it will be a very useful thing to be running in the borough. And of course in the neighbouring borough of Guildford. That is the end of my mayor's announcements. So we now move on to leaders' announcements. Leader, can I invite you to make any announcements, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and good evening, everybody. My first announcement is to confirm what I said at the last executive, that Councillor David Beeman has taken on many other responsibilities and asked me to lighten his load at Waverley. He has been on the executive since the last election and has been chairing one of our planning committees. We discussed this and we decided that the best way to do this was for him to stand down from the executive, and I would like to place on record my heartfelt thanks for the hard work that he has put in and my total respect for him as a worker, a man and as a colleague. To take his place, I have appointed Councillor Michaela Gray to take on exactly the same portfolio as David, so there will be no reshuffle, and I hope there will be a smooth transition. The things that are obviously dominating our life at the moment are COVID. Elmbridge has just gone into the high category, And Waverley, unfortunately, looking at the numbers, is running it a very close second in Waverley. And this is something that neither I nor anybody that I know of quite understands. I would have expected the bigger places such as Woking and Guildford, with perhaps a more noisy nightlife and a more concentrated population, to be ahead of us. But unfortunately, Waverley is a very clear second, and cases in Waverley are rising. I am concerned that there is a possibility we will be following Elmbridge into the high category. And as a precursor to anything that may happen, because we don't know exactly how an area or a council moved from one tier to the other. So I have asked the officers to find out what exactly the criteria are for moving a council into another tier, and what the tipping points are with these various numbers that are published. Because I find it very confusing as a leader not to be able to know exactly how and why we might be moving higher. I read an article from the leader of Elmbridge who felt very much the same. And also, I think if our residents ask us why this is happening to them, I think they deserve a better explanation than someone higher up the totem pole said it had to be. So we are endeavoring to find out exactly how and why these criteria are used and where the tipping points are. And I will report back to council as and when I find out anything or nothing even. Unitary councils has taken a little bit of a backseat. As you are all aware, I'm sure, the government has invited 3 councils, not Surrey, to put forward their proposals for becoming unitary councils. It does, however, seem that Surrey is going to be in the second wave of 5 councils, but the timing of that is completely not understood by anybody. We anticipate the white paper to come out early next year, but again, this is conjecture. And we do know from statements that they have made that Surrey are continuing to work on the background for producing a bid to become a single unitary council for Surrey. This council, as we all know, has voted decisively against that idea, and the groundswell of opinion across Surrey is that that is a bad idea. So the districts and boroughs are continuing with their work with KPMG to produce the evidence which can be used as and when Surrey again rears the spectre of, if you like, a single Surrey unitary. But this work at the moment is phased more to suggesting ways of cooperating between the various councils and drawing closer together, which is a thing I think we would all care to do for efficiency and economy. There have been a number of views of who should do, of how many unitaries there should be. KPMG started studying 24 cases of no unitary, single unitary, 2 unitary, 3 unitary, and 4 unitary. It does seem that the balance of opinion is in favour of a 3 unitary, but this is by no means universally agreed, and there is much more to be done before we come to a decision, which at the moment it isn't necessary because Surrey are at the moment not being invited to bid. The planning white paper coming out at the same time has been a huge distraction for the officers. The planning white paper, which we wrote a lot of notes for our Member of Parliament, Jeremy Hunt, who I'm glad to say used a lot of our rhetoric when he spoke in Parliament. It seems to fail the basic test of providing more housing that can be really affordable by those on low incomes. It has done a number of things which have favoured developers building larger houses and not having to build so-called affordable housing. So we are again putting in our views on this, but it seems to be a developer's charter basically to build for the rich. And I really think it is a very bad thing indeed. I'm going to move on now to ask my members of the executive to give you brief updates in what they're doing. I'm very conscious that at last meeting, a number of views were expressed. One or two, one particularly forceful against the whole idea, and one actually asking us to expand on it. I've therefore kept to the middle course that we were steering before. I am asking my portfolio holders to give you a very brief update. And I think in times like this, where things are moving very quickly and things do not necessarily come on the council agenda, this is a very useful update, particularly for backbenchers and also for the general public. So thank you for listening to me attentively. And I'll now call upon Councillor Merriweather to give you a brief synopsis of what he has been up to.
Thank you, Leader. And if I can just echo your comments regarding Councillors Beeman and Martin, thank you. So good evening, everybody. The last time we met all together, it was an extraordinary meeting to consider an emergency contingency budget. And at that time, you'll recall, we estimated that in this fiscal year, 2021, COVID-19 would cost this council something of the order of £6.6 million, which is over 60% of our share of the council tax paid by our residents. We haven't met since then, so I just wanted to update you with what's happened since then. The biggest single uncertainty in August was the amount of support and grant assistance that we would receive from central government. That has become somewhat clearer, but it is not at all what we believe that we were promised. And as of today, we believe that the government, at very best, will reimburse us, maybe if we're lucky, maybe just north of 50% of our costs and our losses. Now, as the leader said, we are still very much in the thick of it, and the current lead indicators are that it may even get worse before it gets better. Even though our estimates back in August and since may still be holding on or close to what we were thinking, there is plenty of time yet for them to get worse. So with all of those cautions, I would simply say that at the moment, there's no further adverse news, but please manage your expectations. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Certainly echoing the sentiments that we shall, we welcome Councillor Martin to the executive, and we'll very much miss David Beeman and the wisdom and words that he brought to the executive. The Climate Emergency Action Plan will come to the executive at a meeting in December, on the 1st of December. And that is to come. But councillors will have noted that our public consultation on climate change and the draft action plan closed at the weekend. Now, I'm pleased to be able to announce that there was a good response to the consultation, and whilst the results and some detailed comments that were provided are now being analysed carefully, there are a few headlines that we're actually able to share at this point. So, for example, 94% of respondents felt that climate change was important, and of those, 77% felt that it was very important. Residents particularly felt that the more opportunities for recycling and upcycling would help them reduce their carbon footprint. That was a figure of 93%. And in terms of some of the kind of key priorities which were considered as part of the consultation, 90% felt that the council and our contractors could switch to low carbon transport, while 90% felt that new council properties could be built to carbon neutral standards. 88% felt that it was important for the council to lead by example, for example, by prioritising a reduction in their own emissions. And obviously there's a lot more. And as I suggested, there are many useful comments and suggestions which will very much help us, which we will very much take account of as we go forward. But at this particular point in time, it's good to know that the people of Waverley are fundamentally of the opinion that we are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you, Leader. And Madam Mayor. Good evening, everyone. We're all still here, and it's a pretty good roll call, 54 out of 57 tonight. So obviously, Zoom meetings are useful. In terms of community safety, as previously advised, Inspector Sam Adcock has taken over as the Waverley Borough Commander. She's due to attend the SWP meeting later this week. And I'm sure that one of the issues that's going to come up is the growing number of COVID cases. As of 5 o'clock today, it's up to 101 per 100,000. So we need to be vigilant and get that message across to all our constituents. In terms of housing, despite COVID-19, I was able to visit some of the completed properties at Site A at Oxford Ridge. I was really impressed by the finish and the specification. And I understand those who have already moved in are really, really happy with their homes. I believe the last one will be handed over on the 10th of November. So that will bring to an end Site A, moving on to further sites from there. In terms of housing operations, the officers, again, despite difficult situations, do continue to offer fantastic support to our tenants. And I'm also really happy to say that I attended the first virtual AGM of the tenants panel last week. And I did say at the time, I really appreciate the work and commitment of the people on that panel to our tenants, and long may it continue. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to also start by thanking David Beeman for all his good work on the executive. And before he was on the executive, he's been a very good friend to me over the years. And I want to wish David all the best for the future. And also to very much welcome Michaela Martin, colleague Michaela Martin, onto the executive. I won't say too much about planning because it's a big subject on the agenda tonight, but I would just like to mention one thing, which is the very important planning for the future government consultation. There's going to be an all-members briefing on that this Thursday, late afternoon this Thursday, and I encourage all members to attend, or all who can to attend, as we'd very much like their input to the Council's response, which has to be put in by a week later, the 29th of October. So that's all I want to say about planning. I'll briefly say something about Brightwells, my other principal responsibility. As I said at the executive meeting, the scheme is now due to open in July 2021, and that's the commercial part of the scheme, the shops, the restaurants, and shortly after that, the cinema. But just so people understand that there's still a lot will happen after that, which is the completion of the 239 residential units. And the whole scheme won't complete till 2023. The final thing being to take out the temporary access construction bridge and to replace it by a new footbridge and hopefully cycle bridge over the river. So that's all I want to say, Leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I'd like to associate myself with the comments of my colleagues about David Beeman's move. We're looking forward to working with him in his other capacities, but we're sorry to lose him in the executive. But we're very happy to welcome Michaela Martin. Look forward to working with her. we've had a number of inquiries from retailers about the possibility of free parking during December. We're still reviewing that. The two difficulties are, firstly, as Councillor Merriweather will be explaining, we continue to have very serious reservations about the financial situation which the government has landed us with. And secondly, that we are anxious not to encourage crowds on a particular day because it would conflict with the kind of COVID caution which we're very strongly advocating in the current situation. That means that we really don't want a solution where, for instance, on the first Saturday in December, parking is free, because that does encourage exactly what we don't want, of people flocking in that day. We will be looking at whether a way forward can be found, but it is a difficult situation for the reasons that everyone will appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. I'd also like to add my welcome to Councillor Martin and also agree with the comments from my fellow executive regarding Councillor Beeman. I just have a couple of updates because I'll be speaking later on the pesticides policy and action plan. I just wanted to share with members that 8 of our fantastic parks and green spaces have once again been recognised with a Green Flag Award, and I'd just like to thank our Parks and Countryside team, as well as the volunteers and also our contractors Continental for all the hard work that they have done, and also mention that Farnham Park received a much coveted Green Heritage Site accreditation as well for the management of its historic features. Whilst mentioning about this, I also must go on to mention that the Phillips Memorial Park has received a Gold Award for the 7th year running in the large park category for South East in Bloom. And I'm sure members would also like to join me in congratulating Cranley and Bloom, who got a Gold Award, and also Farnham Town Council, who got 4 golds, a silver gilt, as well as an outstanding in the Community Gardening Awards section for Space to Grow and Farnham and the Victoria Garden, which is a huge achievement, especially in these really difficult times. On my other side of my portfolio, the economic development team continue to support our local businesses, meeting with chambers of commerce, towns and parishes, and our business task group on a regular basis, as well as the EM3 local enterprise partnership. And as an indication of how important the work there is that they are doing is, and also how much they're managing to disseminate information down from the government, as well as providing other really important information to local businesses and support. Our mailing list numbers have actually nearly tripled in number, so that's a really good success story and shows how important the information is to our local businesses. For those members who have been avidly watching the Frensham story, I just want to say that finally our efforts over the summer have managed to where we brought all the key stakeholders together. For the first time in many years, we have managed to coordinate an approach which hopefully will finally reduce the antisocial behaviour, antisocial parking rather, for residents. And this week, I've just checked with Surrey Highways, and they've managed to get in 2 kilometres of the double yellow lines, although rain may stop play tomorrow, but they hope to finish it over the half-term period. So this, and along with all the other measures we've managed to implement on and around the site, will hopefully provide some really long-term solutions to the management of traffic around that area and help residents as well. In the previous meeting, our last meeting, I mentioned about the Dunsfold Advisory Group that we've set up, and I just want to let members know that we have had our first meeting on the 8th of October. And this is an extremely important group going forward with maybe Waverley members and also parish councillors as well. And this will help us, obviously, in the timely delivery of the new settlement, focusing on planning and design features, as well as infrastructure delivery and of course, all important housing delivery on the site as well. So hopefully that gives a bit of a whistle-stop tour of those places. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Martin.
I'm just going to say hello, everyone, and just would also like to thank my predecessor, David Beeman, for all his hard work and commitment. Only thing I need to say tonight is that I'd like to inform the council that Gavin Stride and his team at the Farnham Maltings have managed to secure a grant for 165,000 from the Government Emergency Support for Culture. And I would like to congratulate him and his team for all their hard work during this COVID crisis. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. Madam Mayor, before I give you a quick update, just a few words about David Beeman. I've only known David since the last election, but it became apparent very quickly that he's one of the most industrious people I think I've ever met. And I think, as the saying goes, it makes you tired just watching him. So thank you, David, and welcome to Michaela Martin. This evening, my quick update is in three areas: our facilities team, Surrey Police, and Waverley Customer Services. Our facilities team is at the front line and has been responding to the changes to COVID advice given by the government in terms of access to the Burries building, sanitising, provision of antivirus solutions and protective screens. And as we know, this work is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. So I would like to thank the facilities team publicly for all the work they are doing to make the Burries a safe place for all members of staff who are able to return to office working. Now on to reporting the police instead of the police reporting. The Burries is now the base for over 40 response officers from Surrey Police, many of whom used to be based in Guildford. As well as now renting out almost 20 of our car parking spaces, they have also asked to increase their office area. So we are now looking at what we can do to accommodate them. Of course, the simple fact is that we are only in a position to give them this space because of the tremendous shift in the increase of numbers of staff and members who are now working from home, and the space that frees up in the car park and in the office building. Not forgetting, of course, the increased rental income, which is very welcome under the current financial difficulties. Finally, a few words about our customer services department. I'm pleased to report that the new customer service centre went live at the beginning of this month. And over the next few months, we will have the ability to gain a more granular and coordinated feel for the numbers of inquiries from our residents and their subject matter. This will help inform any changes in policy that may be required further down the line. Meanwhile, to support this, work continues behind the scenes, creating a fully integrated customer database that will capture data relating to all the services that the council provides. Well, that's all from me. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of quick updates. Obviously, the changes to how COVID alerts are structured to the current three-tier system, one of the principal impacts of that is actually changes in communications. So I'd just like to thank the comms team for their ongoing work in making sure that the public are kept well informed and up to date on those changes, and particularly in the way that they've been answering many questions from residents, some of which are very complex and currently we're unable to answer without better knowledge of the thresholds, as the Leader has already explained. I also just want to thank Councillor Rubini and also Councillor Barton of Surrey County Council for their time. We met with Natural England in response to some discussions regarding LPP2, which I'm sure we'll get into in more depth later. but it was a very useful and productive discussion. And I think we've set in motion some good relationships with Natural England for further down the line as may be necessary. And I'll just conclude by also saying thank you to Councillor Beeman for all of his work. I've only known him a couple of years, but I think Councillor Clark is absolutely right. His work ethic is almost scary, even to a youngster. So I really do want to thank him for everything he's done, and of course welcome Councillor Martin to the executive. Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for your indulgence. I'll now try and keep them quiet for a bit.
Should we move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is questions from members of the public. There is one question from Professor Tom Oliver, who is speaking on behalf of the Hazelmere South Residents Association. Professor Oliver has joined the meeting to ask his question.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. So I'd like to ask how the proposed development on AONB and AONB candidate land on the Red Court site is commensurate with a recent national pledge to safeguard biodiversity and also the Waverley Council policy declaration on climate emergency. So just to give a little bit more context to that question, to introduce myself, I'm Professor of Applied Ecology at the University of Reading. I work with DEFRA, seconded on their systems research programme. So that's aiming to take a bigger picture look at environmental policy development. And I also sit as a member of the European Environment Agency Scientific Committee. Now, the site allocation at Red Court conflicts with achieving national and local policy targets. The Prime Minister declared a UK commitment to reversing the losses of biodiversity. So the UK is failing in its biodiversity targets, has been for the last over 20 years. Internationally, we're failing. This has been described by the PM as a planetary emergency, which in his own words will be catastrophic for all of us, so our action must be immediate. This impact includes future generations. I have children, as many of you will have children, grandchildren, young nieces and nephews. You know, I want my children to get on the housing ladder, but more importantly, I want them to live in a country that can feed itself if need be. And this is genuinely threatened by the loss of pollinators, soil biodiversity, natural enemies of pests. Biodiversity is essential for food production. So to quote again the leader of the Conservatives in Downing Street, biodiversity fundamentally underpins human health, well-being and prosperity. We cannot afford to dither and delay because biodiversity loss is happening today and it is happening at a frightening rate. Left unchecked, the consequences will be catastrophic for all of us. Extinction is forever, so our action must be immediate. Now, the biodiversity net gain principles in the UK National Planning Policy Framework specifically state to first avoid biodiversity loss where at all possible. Now, there is a choice here because this is not like the route for HS2, where whichever way that route went, it would damage some ancient woodland. There's an important choice here, and councils around the country face this important choice on whether to allow further biodiversity loss through site allocation on high biodiversity value land like Red Court. The second principle of biodiversity net gain is to mitigate harm. Now that's very difficult, and it's, if not impossible, to mitigate effects successfully. For example, recent scientific evidence shows that reptile translocation is not effective. So there would be harm to protected reptile species on this land that could not be mitigated. So I can say with professional certainty that the proposed site allocation would lead to less biodiversity on the site. In particular, the presence of priority rare species would be significantly lower than before. The type of species on any restored land would likely be common suburban species. They will not replace, in terms of type or richness, the biodiversity lost. So this is an important environmental zone. Biodiversity does not recognise council boundaries. Over here where I am in Reading, it's the same ecological neighbourhood. Your site is in a particularly high species richness for this zone. So the site allocation decision that you face influences many people across southern England and future generations. So it's an important choice to make, but in a sense the decision is made easier because the development conflicts with the Waverley Borough Council requirement that new development should make a positive contribution to biodiversity in the borough. So in summary, with a substantial net biodiversity loss conflicting with both the council's own and the national government strategy, I would ask, why is Red Court being considered for approval as a site allocation in this local plan part 2? Thank you for your time in allowing this question.
Thank you, Professor Oliver. Now, could I ask Councillor Nick Palmer to respond on behalf of the executive? He's the executive portfolio with the remit for development management.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Many thanks, Professor Oliver, for his comments. At this point, I do need to give a formal reply. In the same way as any application, planning application WA 2020-1213 for housing at Red Court will be assessed on its own relative planning merits against the provisions of the development plan, the National Planning Policy Framework, and all other material considerations. This will include due consideration of matters of sustainability and biodiversity. The Council has consulted Natural England and Surrey Wildlife Trust, and their views, together with responses from other statutory and non-statutory consultees and representations received from third parties, will be taken into account in reaching a decision on this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Should we move on to item 7, questions from the members? There are 2 questions from members. The first is from Councillor Jerry Hyman. Would you ask your question, please, Councillor Hyman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening. My question is, Madam Mayor, in respect of the conservation of the biodiversity and endangered species of special protection areas, will you please confirm to members and the public that the approach taken by Natural England and Waverley Borough Council since 2008, that is of evading any appropriate assessment of proposed mitigation strategies, has been determined by the courts to be unlawful, in fact, and indeed confirm that in considering planning applications and local plans, where there's a possibility that in combination effects of residential development within the visitor catchment areas pose a risk to the protected species populations, we are firmly bound by the judgments of the European and domestic courts in the People over Wind and Sweetman 2018 and Crondall 2019 cases, such that in the absence of a risk assessment detailing the extent to which mitigation is effective, to adopt or grant consent to an affected plan or project, or indeed to get a consultation on it, is unlawful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I can confirm that the Council continues to apply the habitats regulations lawfully in respect of plans and projects that are likely to have a significant effect on special protection areas. The Council has taken external legal advice, which has confirmed that its approach is lawful. The Council will continue to monitor this area closely in order to ensure its approach remains legally compliant. Thank you. Shall we move on to the question by Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, could I give the background to my question? As a Waverley member of the Surrey Local Committee, I, and I presume my fellow committee members, received an email from a Surrey County Council officer, which was written on behalf of the Surrey Fire and Rescue Service. It asked us to refuse any representations to the committee from representatives of our firefighters, quoting confidentiality issues connected to a dispute. I do not feel that we should not hear from any of our residents, particularly as my understanding of the issues is there are concerns about the level of manning and coverage, which could put our residents at risk, particularly as we're being encouraged to build more and more homes. I would like to hear from a professional firefighter, and as I don't want a situation where the fire service is unable to respond quickly and fully manned, I would seek assurances from Surrey Fire and Rescue Service that this will not be the case. It then went on to state that if a member of the public raised this issue at a committee, They would be grateful if we told them it was a trade dispute, and it would be inappropriate for us to discuss the matter further. My question is, does the council feel that an attempt by Surrey County Council to stop councillors discussion of the changes to fire cover in Surrey is valid, as our remit is to protect our residents? I think that this is undemocratic and totally lacking in transparency. Anything that puts our residents at risk is most definitely our business and should be discussed in an open forum. I would ask my fellow members to support this view. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Leader, I think you were replying to this question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for your refreshingly brief and concise question. There seem to be two issues here. Firstly, the actual disagreement between the Fire Brigade Union and Surrey County Council. And secondly, the attempt which you have just reported to prevent councillors from discussing or speaking about certain items. To deal with the first issue, the actual recommendation for the future of the fire service, for which we are not responsible, but we can debate it. And I'm sure it will be debated at the forthcoming Community Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which will be reviewing the Community Safety Partnership. On the other, the report that you have brought to us of officers from another council, however senior it might feel itself to be, attempting to issue instructions to our councillors not to discuss items of importance with other parties is, of course, totally unacceptable, as we remain committed to openness and transparency and would like to hear from any of our residents, whatever their views, so that we may have a clear picture of what is going on and not just be guided by what another council tells us. Thank you again for your question.
Thank you, Leader.
We now move on to item 8. I can report that there are no motions submitted. We move on to the minutes of the executive. Leader, could you introduce the minutes of the meetings held on the 8th of October and the 8th of September and the 6th of October?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would be delighted to present those minutes, and I do believe I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are no Part 1 items in the September meeting. So what I would intend to do is deal with all the Part 2 items together at the end, and so go straight to the matters of main content, which are the Part 1 items in the October meeting. The first item, as you can see in your agenda, is Waverley Local Plan Part 2. When Local Plan Part 1 was passed, it was decided that site allocations would be made by neighbourhood plans by some areas, e.g. Farnham, and that LPP2 would be concerned, among other things, with site allocations in other places. We've had to delay this plan because of difficulties in finding allocations which were agreeable to people in Hazelmere and Whitley. And we have also had put upon us new strictures about dealing with travellers. Nothing is perfect, but this delayed plan is meant to help Hazelmere in particular, as we put out an extra call for sites. And we got back a number of sites, some of which will appear in LPP2 and some of which will not. I must thank Professor Oliver for his really excellent contribution to this debate, and it underlines the huge problem that we have. We are between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, we have the local plan, which had to go through the planning inspectors, who are government agents, informing us of how many houses we had to build. and we have no choice but to comply. On the other hand, we have Natural England, what one might call a government quango, telling us where we cannot build. And this has caused huge difficulties in trying to find sites which Natural England approve, but which will come up to the numbers required by the inspectorate. What I feel need to do now is to go out to consultation, and during that time, more sites may come forward, and we will continue discussing with Natural England to see if their views might be modified. But at the moment, I would put this to you as a valid document to go out to public consultation. And I do assure everybody, as certain inferences have been made, that we might not be listening to the public, that all the reactions we get will be taken on board and carefully considered before the plan is finalized. So I say again, this is a draft for consultation, and with your indulgence, Madam Mayor, I'd like to ask the portfolio holder to put a bit of flesh on the bones. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Leader. Just as and I'd like to make a few introductory remarks before we get into the debate. And thanks for your very helpful opening remarks as well. In terms of the local plan, and to put this LPP2 in context, when this is approved next year, it will finally replace the 2002 local plan. And of course, there's been some overlap with this new local plan, which actually started in 2013. And in 2018, under the previous administration, we had LPP1 approved, which covered strategic policies and sites. LPP2 covers site allocations and development management policies. So that's putting that into context. And the government, incidentally, by the way, in terms of the consultation that I referred to earlier, they're going to streamline the local planning process, and local plans aren't going to be allowed to last longer than about 10 years and have to be re-looked at after 5 years. The other thing I'd like to say in introduction is actually to very much thank the officers, Zach and his team, and particularly the planning policy team under Graham Parrott, for the tremendous amount of work they've done in all of this. And it's very good to have Graham team in particular available, because that provides continuity with the previous administration. It's a pretty difficult task to produce a local plan, actually. You've got to satisfy the general public, you've got to satisfy a whole range of local bodies such as residents associations, you've got to satisfy local councils, the local town and parish councils, you've got to satisfy a whole range of developers who want their sites to be included in the plan. And finally, there's a very difficult job of satisfying the Secretary of State, represented by the planning inspector, who will be examining the plan next year, which is a big exercise in itself. That examination takes something like 2 weeks or so normally. So that it's a terrific amount of work done. It's a very big, if you look at the size of the document, it's well over 200 pages, and there's a lot of backing pages as well. So a great deal of thanks to Zach and his team and Graham and his team. There's one or two things I'd like to cover actually in introduction, because they cover things that may come up in the discussion, and in that sense perhaps help for the discussion. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Stephen Mulliner, who isn't here tonight, but I'd still very much like to thank him. Stephen actually keeps a very close eye on housing numbers in Hazelmere, being a local councillor in Hazelmere. And he has actually discovered that there's been a small error in our planning numbers. I, in a sense, will apologise for that, but I'll point out actually it's a very difficult job to keep planning numbers across the whole of this borough. There's a whole number of different categories you've got to look at in terms of the numbers, and it's not that surprising you get small mistakes creeping in. The end result of the small mistakes that Stephen has pointed out to us is that we've actually got 7 more houses in Hazelmere than we thought we had towards our numbers. So that's on the good side, if you like. And that doesn't really disturb anything in terms of the local plan. But we also thought as a result of Stephen's work and his comments to us, we ought to check other areas of the council's numbers, particularly the Whitley numbers, as they're the other ones that have been done to help with neighbourhood plans. And in fact, we found the other way around, it was 6 short for Whitley. But we don't see that as a big problem, actually, because that can actually be dealt with as part of the secrets side, where we were actually keeping the secrets numbers down a little bit to fit the local numbers required. So there's no great difficulty in adding 6 to the secrets site. So that's the first thing. The second councillor who's been in contact with me is Councillor Townsend, Liz Townsend, who pointed out a concern she had on page 124 of the plan, paragraph 5.42, which referred to the Downs link and policy DM33 relating to how we're going to use the Downs link in future. Liz was concerned that we seem to be implying that the only possible use of the Downs link was to actually restore the railway lines, and that may or may not be a possibility. It's probably pretty unlikely, but there's plenty of other possible uses of the Downs link. So we've reworded some of the paragraphs in that area just to reflect the fact that the Downs link is not necessarily dedicated to a new railway line. The third councillor I'd like to thank is Councillor Robert Knowles. Councillor Knowles has shown a great deal of interest in all the water problems that we have in Hazelmere, and there are genuine problems when you have Thames Water having to actually truck in water for the local community. You've got a water problem, and Councillor Knowles is very concerned whether or not the local plan is dealing with that properly. The thing I have to say about that actually is that the government is not going to allow us to actually refuse planning applications just because we perceive there to be a water problem. And that the arrangement between the government and the water companies, as we discovered in the meetings we had with Thames Water in 2019 and 2020, is that it's up to Thames Water to supply the water. That's the obligation they've got towards the government. But nevertheless, we will take Councillor Knowles' comments very seriously. And the line that we have to take is that we will schedule any work that's actually going to be done in Hazelmere so that houses are not built before the actual water problem is sufficiently resolved. So that's our general answer to that one. The last thing I'd like to bring up is a contact I've had from Councillor John Rubini about his concern in terms of the consultation process, that we're going into a consultation process if the council approves this document for consultation this evening. And his concern, it's a very valid concern, that in the COVID situation, how do we actually deal with people who don't have an internet capability? Under normal circumstances, what we would do in all previous similar situations, we'd put copies of the document into local libraries or into local council offices, so people without computers or people who didn't want to use the internet could come along and examine the documents locally. But that's a big problem right now, actually, in that you can't just put documents in, because if somebody comes along to, say, to a local library and picks up a book, before that book is put back on the shelves, the book has to be fully sanitized. And exactly the same would apply to this very large 200-page document, which is not an easy thing to solve. Now, the government has actually told us that despite the problems of COVID, we're not to delay local planning, we've got to go ahead with it, but they haven't told us what to do about it. They're saying it's up to us as the local, with our local knowledge, to sort out how we do it. So in discussion with Zach and his team, what we've decided to do is to ask for advice from the planning inspectorate, because the planning inspectorate have a responsibility to ensure that we do consultation properly, not just to people who have internet capability, but to everybody. So we'll be asking advice from the planning authority, because the local planning inspector will have to decide when it comes to examine our plan that we've done the consultation properly. I don't know what the outcome of that will be, because this is not an easy problem to solve, I can assure you, but we will find a way of solving it, in fact. But it's a very genuine problem that Councillor Rubini has brought up, and it's something we'll have to resolve. So that's all I want to say in introduction, Madam Mayor. So if I can conclude my remarks now and leave it to the general debate. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. So I have a number of hands up, but there are a number of people who have asked to be considered out of order, as it were. So we'll start with Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, may I just thank the officers for the amount of work that's gone into this document, both under the previous administration and under this one. It's clearly a huge amount of work. The administration, though, has two firm commitments in terms of LPP2. The very first one is to do what the previous administration did not, and actually pass this and pass it in order to provide further protection to the areas of the borough that need it. And in that particular area, I speak of the east of the borough in particular, where that protection is most needed. Second is to try and ensure that we do everything we can to listen to the wishes of local people, and particularly those who are in areas where LPP2 is actually allocating sites. And the way we wanted to do that was by listening to their local residents, but also their draft and enacted neighbourhood plans. And so in particular, I'm talking about Whitley and Hazelmere. Considerable work has been done by officers with the full support of the executive and particularly the portfolio holder to call for new sites in Whitley and Hazelmere, to fairly review all the sites that came forward. And in Whitley, this has ended up with an allocation much more in concert with the wishes of the neighbourhood plan group, parish council, and certainly most of the local residents I've spoken to over the last couple of years through the allocation of the land of secrets. And I particularly like to thank councillors Baker and Gale of Milford, as well as many of the reps from Whitley Parish Council, including its chair, Councillor McCalden, and the neighbourhood plan group for their extremely constructive contributions towards that endeavour. Hazelmere has been a bit more of a significant challenge. I don't sit on the Southern Planning Committee, so I'm going to be quite clear. I both sympathise and agree with the view put forward by Professor Oliver at the beginning of the session. However, at present, the only realistic alternative has an objection from Natural England, and we are forced to propose the allocation that we have as a result. As much as I would like it to be so, fine words from the government have not actually been enacted in planning policy, and so we are forced to follow the rules that are actually in place. The eternally inadequate national planning policy of this country means that we have to allocate this sort of site because of that objection. And we really have no choice, despite the fact that allocating this site, allocating the alternative site we had in mind, would actually be a significant net gain in terms of biodiversity and in terms of supporting Natural England with a small n. There seems to be no scope to think of the bigger picture, to use Professor Oliver's words from earlier, only to assess application by application. And that is, I think, the root of the issue here. But we've been working with Natural England. We've met them. I met them alongside officers, Councillor MacLeod, Councillor Rini, Councillor Barton, to understand that objection more fully. And I've no doubt in this consultation process we're about to embark on, we'll shine some further light on this. And in the long run, I would not be at all surprised if the current allocation as proposed comes up with a similar objection from Natural England or the Surrey Hills AONB, putting us back to square one in terms of sites that we can allocate to Hazelmere. But I'm sure that will come forward in the fullness of time. But just to conclude, this is a consultation process we're trying to kick off here. It's not the final document. I have faith that we will continue to explore the outcomes sought by both the executive and the people of Hazelmere. And I think there is some possibility that they might be met. We know the mechanism by which it can then be amended post the LPP2 post consultation. But we have a wider duty to the borough as a whole to ensure this Part 2 document gets onto our books as soon as possible. And so I have no trouble tonight voting for the document to move to the consultation phase while we continue to work with members, officers and the people of Hazelmere in particular to enact some small changes to the final document. I'm sure other people will talk about water more specifically and the consultation process itself. But at this stage, very happy to support the recommendations. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Can I take it slightly out of order, as Councillor Potts had asked to speak before the meeting? So can I move to Councillor Potts and then to Councillor Rabin? Councillor Potts.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. I will keep my comments very short. I think in actual fact the portfolio holder and deputy leader have actually covered quite a few of the key salient points here. It is indeed extremely difficult, as I know from past experience, when it comes to local plans and the pleasing or trying to please everyone. You just don't. I have myself some very serious concerns and reservations about parts of the proposals and the policies before us this evening. However, I think at this stage, the right thing and the only thing that we can do is to support the recommendations before us, go out to public consultation. I'm very pleased to hear from the portfolio holder that every avenue in terms of getting that public consultation out as widely as possible under the current COVID restrictions is going to be explored, because that is crucial. I then look forward to actually hearing what the people of Waverley have to say about their community and the proposals that will really affect their community for the forthcoming years, and then taking my decision at a future council meeting from there. But as I say, I really would urge the portfolio holder to do all he can in consultation with the planning inspectorate and so forth, to make sure that we find a way to reach as many people within our borough as possible. That is absolutely crucial if we're to bring them along on any of these proposals tonight. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Now, Councillor Lavini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wish to speak on this as I represent Hazelmere, and I'm going to speak in general terms as I'm not predetermining any planning application that will be coming into Waverley. I have several issues. Let me start with a general comment. The government are putting pressure on councils, as you've heard, to build more housing, and are easing the rules to allow this. At the same time, they are recognising the wildlife and climate emergency are putting pressure on biodiversity and beautiful, of course, natural areas such as ours. Prince William, David Attenborough, and many other groups are also recognising this climate emergency and want support and, of course, change. I agree we need housing, but what we do need, above most housing, is social housing, rather than the badly named affordable housing that comes forward. Applications from planning are becoming more noticeable, with viability studies showing they cannot achieve even the modest affordable targets set by Waverley and the government. In fact, I've noticed several recently coming through at zero. So not only are we not achieving social housing, we are not achieving the affordable numbers. Housing must be targeted at brownfield sites. Perhaps we may increase density numbers in our urban, and a better counting of windfall sites, as you've heard, it's coming from people like Councillor Munner. I'd like to thank you for doing those figures. Now, we need to make sure that we have ways of achieving this. Apart from those, it's not easy, but surely working together, we could achieve it. You've heard about the Royal School coming forward. That's working amongst the officers and ourselves to try and put alternatives. Let us hope that by working with Natural England, we can come to some sort of conclusion. And I'd like to thank Councillor Follows for actually promoting and actually arranging this meeting. This is what our community wants. In surveys for our neighbourhood plan, they are overwhelming in this view of conserving this type of land. We need to support our local community and lead in this direction. It was, after all, what we were elected to do, and they have demonstrated their support for this, as opposed to destroying any of the AONB, AGLV surrounding our town. This was demonstrated by the huge number of objections on the Waverley planning site recently, causing it to malfunction when such an application came forward. We need to protect our environment, promote diversity, and help the planet. We also have infrastructure problems. I could mention roads. A number of the planning applications have difficulty with the transport routes. But however, probably the greatest is the water supply. We heard earlier about the problems we're having in Hazelmere. Thames Water have agreed that during hotspots, and I myself got this letter, They cannot supply the amount of water needed. I had no water, and that is on the present supply of housing. We need it now. However, they arranged extra water coming in by using large tankers, which of course adds to the pollution. This didn't solve the problem, but it did at least help some of the lower down houses to gain a little bit of water. This topped up their supplies. How do we add more housing that needs more supplies? We have 130 odd houses in the pipeline down at Sturt Farm. So the next hot time, there'll be another 130 people that potentially will not get water. We were told earlier in the year that there is no short-term fix. I would like to thank Tom Hord for arranging that meeting. I was very surprised at some of the answers, that in fact the infrastructure is not as capable as perhaps we thought it was. And there is, as I say, no short-term fix. It's more likely to be several years in the future. To try and help this process along, I am meeting with the Chief Executive Officer of Thames Water and our MP at the end of November to discuss these issues and see if there's any way that we can look at it in a shorter term. Now, I'd like to thank Councillor MacLeod and Councillor Follows. I had got those questions that you've already heard. However, thank you, Councillor MacLeod, for satisfying me that you are looking hard at how we are going to consult, because I felt that was a big problem. And Councillor Follows for assuring us that when we get those replies back, they will be listened to. Because as you know, there are several agencies that will go out to consultation because they have to, but when they get those responses back, they ignore them because they've complied with their regulations and law, they have consulted, they've asked people. What they forget is there's a second part to all of this. We need to listen to that consultation. So thank you for reassuring me on that point. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I take on board everything everybody has said, and there are some issues, but we are one borough. We can't see our motto. Normally we can see it, but it does say town and countryside in unity. That is what we are about. We are about the borough. And in the borough, we have a problem. I have a sort of, I suppose it's an affliction really. I'm a bit of an appeal junkie. I tend to go, well, in fact, I do go and have gone for the last 20 years to every single appeal, hearing or inquiry that affects a Farnham site. To begin with, I just went because of it, try and find out what was going on. Later, as we went through the neighbourhood plan, and remember Farnham's had 2 neighbourhood plans since the Localism Act, so all of that gave me the confidence to speak up on behalf of the town at these appeals, because we lose appeals on 2 items. We always talk about the 5-year housing land supply, and that is an issue. We spend 2.5 days sometimes picking out every single site and saying, oh, there won't be 27 there, there'll only be 25. And, they pick every single figure to pieces for about 2.5 days. But then the other killer blow is that local plan part 1 does not identify enough sites for its housing allocation. This is trumped out every single time we have an appeal. And poor old Alfold at the moment is the place that's had the biggest hit because of this. In the past, it's been Cranley, it's been Farnham. At the moment, it's poor Alfold who is mopping up the mess of this. We do need to allocate enough sites for our housing allocations. That is absolutely vital. If we don't do that, we will never win an appeal. We just can't win an appeal. The QCs come along and say, look, I've got a shovel-ready site here. You haven't identified enough sites, therefore you must build on this one. So we have to get this out to consultation. As I think Councillor Follows said, maybe some others, it will change through the Reg 19, which remember is a technical consultation. It's not like your options one, but anyway, the Reg 19 goes out and then we have the examination in public. Plenty of time for details and for the bigger picture to come into play. But what we need at the moment, and believe it or not, we need it even more because of the white paper consultation, we need to get local plan part 2 through the process. We need a full local plan. We need it to tick all the boxes, and I'm sure by the end of the consultation and the examination we'll have that. So there are battles to be done, but we as a borough are vulnerable until we have local plan part 2 adopted as part of our development plan. Along with, I'm delighted that Whitley is pleased with its allocation. As some of you know, for years we've been working together on neighbourhood plans, not with different sort of amounts of success. And I'm delighted that Whitley, Milford and Whitley are pleased with what their outcome is. And I'm sure there'll be battles to be fought in other areas. But the point about this is it's a consultation document. It is what we need as a borough. And there are times, and I speak as somebody who's always banging on about Farnham, but there are times when we actually have to look at the borough, and this is one of them. Planning affects every single part of the borough, however small the village, however large the town. And we need a complete local plan adopted so that whatever happens as a result of the white paper, and I hope going back to Councillor Rabini, we've all put in lots of suggestions to the government of how they can actually get the brownfield land available and actually take out affordable housing from the land value house price conundrum, because as we all know, you cannot build your way out of the lack of affordability. It just doesn't work. We've had Kate Barker, we've had Oliver Lett, we've had loads of people looking at this. You can't do it. The only way we'll get affordable homes is brownfield sites donated so that we're taking them out of the land value situation. So I am 100% behind this local plan going out to consultation. And I hope during the consultation, the examination, we come up with something that pleases every single part of the borough. But we cannot delay this. We cannot delay the examination. We have to go full speed to get this adopted so that we have got a full neighbourhood plan that works for all of us. So I am fully supportive of this, and I will certainly be supporting the executive tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. I think Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I am here, but in spite of the fact that I have my iPad plugged in to the power supply, it's warning me that my battery is low. So I will say, I hope quite quickly what I have to say. I'd like to speak about the Whitley site allocations and say that the inclusion of secret site in those put forward in LPP2 has been a long cherished wish of Whitley Parish Council. And I applaud their persistence and doggedness in promoting this site. It has been quite a long haul. And I would also like to say, because neighbourhood plan is really has to be totally integrated with LPP2, I would like to say thank you and applaud the efforts of the neighbourhood plan team at Whitley, led by Cathy Smythe. I do think that here we have, with secrets being included in LPP2 sites, we have an opportunity to turn vision into reality, subject, of course, to whatever plans come forward eventually being acceptable. I think that secrets in its location and its sheer extent offers a great deal. It is very central to the village, as the village is at the moment. I would like to thank the officers in the planning policy team for facing a bit of a change and really doing some very important work, which was very much needed to support the inclusion of secrets. I think they have done a very good job, and I, for one, am very grateful to them. I think that apart from wishing to urge everybody to support the recommendation, I would just like to speak briefly about how we come to be doing LPP2 now. And I seem to remember that it was in fact a Conservative administration that didn't go along with the government's requirements for housing quotas. And this is all a very long time ago. But as a result, the first attempt at the local plan was thrown out and had to be revisited. And that is the reason why we're only now doing LPP2. So I think that is a lesson to be taken forward, actually. So as I said before, well done to Whitley Parish Council for its doggedness. Well done the planning policy officers for the really hard work that they did. And I support the recommendation and would urge everybody else to vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. It has become my reasoned conclusion that there are processes, contradictions and ambiguities within the planning enforcement that actively frustrate planning fairness, to my great concern.
Yeah.
Agenda item page 118 gives LPP2 priority to discretion within planning enforcement, whereas government policy states LPA should manage enforcement proactively by monitoring the implementation of planning permissions. Local authorities have the responsibility for taking whatever enforcement action may be necessary in the public interest. In the public interest, I repeat the term public interest, in their administrative areas. It is unreasonable to expect that planning development will be implemented lawfully without monitoring. Breaches can occur by omission and commission. LPP2 planning enforcement declared policy must be compatible with statutory enforcement obligations and government policy. It would be helpful if within public consultation, we recognise these failures. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. My concern, which I've expressed on several occasions in the past, as members may well be aware, is the water supply in my ward, which is Hazelmere East, which is the part of Hazelmere supplied by Thames Water. The other half, the western end, is supplied by a different company, the old Wey Valley Water Company, now South East. And I'd like to thank the portfolio holder for his remarks at the start, which are helpful, and also for Councillor Rubini for taking away most of what I was going to say anyway. So thank you very much. I am concerned about this, that with the repeated failures, there are already some 200 permissions at, as Councillor Rubini said, Sturt Farm, and also the flats now under construction at Way Hill, which will all take water off the Thames Water supply, which can't maintain a supply now on warm or dry days. So with the listed sites in the area supplied by Thames Water, not one particular site, but a number, some 150 or more houses, it is a great concern because we do have responsibility for safety. Now, planning inspectors may think they're above the law, but eventually they'll find they're not. And that has happened in other countries in recent years, and then there are trials held when people have hidden behind, oh, that's what the government say. So the lives of my residents are important, and the matter of water gives me great concern. This isn't something that may happen, it has happened on numerous occasions now. And it is vital that we take that into account. And whilst I understand we have to try and meet the number of houses that are required by putting other people's lives at risk so that Hazelmere Hospital has to have a water tanker, does not seem to me an acceptable way to do it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, well, Councillor Knowles quite rightly raises the matter of pins thinking they're above the law, but tonight is about whether we think we're above the law, isn't it? I thank you for my response to the question earlier, but it obviously that response there wasn't written by yourself, you know better. And I would like to know outside of the meeting who's responsible for that response. But if I can address the issue, please, that's in hand. Firstly, obviously, Regulation 9 of the Habitats Directive requires, and this is a fact, not my opinion, that simple fact that it requires that we consider the directive and the case law which determines how we implement it in all of our decisions, and this is one such decision tonight. And obviously what we can't do is take something forward which is not compliant for consultation, because we're just conning the residents basically. Can you, so please, the first thing that I'd like to know from officers is whereabouts is the appropriate assessment? I have written to members just laying out what it says in the National Planning Policy Guidance, which is a clarification of the law. And if I very quickly quote it, this is from paragraph 006 of the National Planning Policy Guidance on Appropriate Assessment. It says, and I quote, "It would appear that off-site SANGs may be considered as a mitigation measure under people over wind judgment, as their primary purpose is to draw recreational pressure away from sites and so prevent an adverse effect from occurring. In these cases, the competent authority must now assess the robustness of mitigation measures through an appropriate assessment." And of course, that's what Natural England, Waverley and others have been evading for the past 15 years, but the law's made it perfectly clear we do need the convincing objective evidence that honesty, that is, in respect of the efficacy or extent to which mitigation is effective, and we don't have that. So I want to know, please, is anybody claiming that we do? Because we can't go on tonight. We have to defer until we have that. I mean, I have listened to what other members have said, and they've given their opinions, but not one of them has addressed the issue of the overriding issue of, have we actually assessed the overriding environmental constraints in law? And we haven't, because that does not exist. You said in your address, Madam Mayor, to the annual council, the mayor making, that we were going to do the right thing. I think residents can expect us to hold good to that. And obviously the right thing does not involve completely ignoring the law as it stands, written, which I don't think anyone in this council wants to, is brave enough to stand up and deny. You know, it's been confirmed. Natural England's advice and opinions over the past 15 years have been proven wrong. The same has been of Waverley Borough Council's approach. The advice from our officers, the advice from lawyers, which we've paid for with residents' money, has been wrong. The courts have determined that. Common sense says it. You can't just make up mitigation and pretend that it's going to work. But yet that's what everybody, the elephant in the room here, nobody is paying any attention whatsoever to it. I don't know, perhaps they're just not man enough to admit it. You know, obviously it's something which has been going on a long time, and people just need to accept the facts and be brave about it. I don't expect our officers to admit that they've been ignoring the law for 15 years and misadvising us, but that's something we have to face up to. No, they're not going to admit it. They can't do. That's just the way life is. But we have a role to play. We are bound by the requirements of the law and by our constitution to represent our residents faithfully, and we have to do that. So I will certainly be voting against this because I know I have to. Other members know they have to as well. We do not have an assessment. We've been told, Madam Chairman, Councillor Coburn has told us, reiterated that there's some message that we have protection out there, which we need, which forces us to put this through regardless of whether it's lawful or not. And what is that protection? What protection is there? And I'd like officers to answer this. What protection is offered in LPP2 where habitats, if applied properly, does not give far greater protection? We are far better off, to be honest, do this honestly for residents and properly, instead of one and another, yet again, just like we had throughout the last administrations, telling us that, oh, we've got to vote for this because otherwise everything will go horribly wrong. No, we know that local plans, neighbourhood plans are a trick where the government gets residents to have some sort of ownership and take ownership of a plan to have development dumped on them that they don't really want, but they're told they've got no choice, they've got to take it. And we know from Allfold's experience and from Farnham's experience that when you put those plans in place, the government just dumps more on us. We know we can't trust Natural England. We know we can't trust the government. We can trust the facts. We can trust the fact that there is no appropriate assessment. We can trust the law. And that's what we need to do. And that's what I will continue to do, Madam Mayor. I would like to ask, please, that those two questions are answered. Where is the appropriate assessment of the mitigation? And and also what are the advantages to pushing this through and ignoring the law, because that's a big risk to do in front of our residents, obviously. Why should we ignore the law? And what are the advantages? But also I'd like to ask that we have a recorded vote on this so that residents can see who's able to be honest in this chamber and who isn't. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hyman, I don't think it would be appropriate for officers to answer at this particular moment. I think we should just carry on with the debate, and then hopefully we can move on and discuss your questions later. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and of course I'm for honesty too, and I'll try and be honest. The housing is an immensely contentious issue. We all know large numbers of people who arrive in the borough and live in nice new houses and then declare that they really don't want anybody else to follow them. And of course we know that that can't happen. We need more houses. So I would just like to speak in support of this. This is a consultation. I would agree entirely with what Councillor Coburn said. We just need to get on with this and build the protection that we need. I also, like many others, welcome the secret site being added for consultation at Milford, or Whitley and Milford. That's a huge step forward. We do need to get out and consult with as many people as we can. I would just observe that when we went out to consultation on LPP1, despite the fact that it was a very important issue and we sent communications to every household, we actually received fewer replies to that consultation than we got replies from proposals to change dog littering in bylaws on dog littering a few months later. So getting the replies back from the people is often very difficult, despite the fact that this is really important. But I just want to say I do strongly support this. We do need to get on with it. We do need to get through with the consultation, and let's get resolution of the part 2 of this local plan. Get it fixed so that we can provide the protection that we all need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I have Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Listening to all the speakers this evening from across the groups, I'm finding it really refreshing that there seems to be more that we can agree on this evening than we cannot. And as Councillor Coburn said, we are one borough. So with that in mind, can we ask our Conservative colleagues, firstly, to communicate our concerns to central government, and secondly, to support these recommendations this evening? And in answer to Councillor Hyman, this is a recommendation to go to consultation. It's not to pass LPP2. I am very aware that you're very passionate about the issue, But when you come to talk about unlawfulness, that is a very high bar to raise. The law is always open to interpretation, and the planning barrister that came to us last year and spoke to us, and remember, he's
Point
the
of
man
order,
that wrote
Chair,
the book on it.
Madam Mayor. Point of order, Madam Mayor. I only stated facts, and we're getting opinions here which are unevidenced and which quite frankly, just somebody's making up at the top of their head. And we really do need to stick to
Councillor
the
Hyman,
facts.
it's not a point of order. It's also you've been giving an opinion, and you're not listening to mine because it's not yours. I just think we need to be very careful when we come
I
out
have
with words
not been
like
giving my
unlawfulness.
opinions. I'm
Yours
not
is an
giving
opinion.
opinions. I'm stating the law as it's been determined, Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Hyman, could you please stop? Nobody interrupted yours at all. Will you let Dick carry on, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Having worked as a lawyer for a number of years, as I said, the law is always open to interpretation, and you can come in thinking you've got everything sorted. But when you go to an expert barrister who has written the book on planning law, and he says we're not doing anything unlawful, I can't see where you're getting your facts to say that you are right and he is wrong. And I just think we need to take account of the facts and the legal advice we're given, which, as you say, we pay for, and actually take a step back and look back at what we're doing tonight, which is not dealing with the case you refer to. It's dealing with a recommendation to go out to consultation. So please, can you just give us some time to talk to the people in our constituency who, as you say, we are all here to represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rosman. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Mayor. First, can I start by thanking Professor Oliver for his question. I appreciate that it was specific to one particular application, which we can't predetermine here, but I think it's a question and a point that will come up time and time and time again. It's something that we need to get used to. We're in a bit of a mess, aren't we? I'm going to support the consultation because it is a consultation. But we're in a mess, not necessarily because people need places to live, not because we haven't been consulting with Natural England up until now as much as we should have been, not necessarily because Thames Water can't or won't do their job. I think it's because we, better or worse, we have a government that doesn't match its words with its deeds. And we have to get used to the idea that until we get a government that is serious about this and fulfilling its promises, we're going to be playing this game of whack-a-mole for some time to come. And that's a great shame. I just hope it all gets sorted out before this consultation is over. In my ward, in Webber and Badshot Lee, my residents have played the game. They played the game with the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, and they are still fighting to have what was promised to them, which is agreed in the neighbourhood plan, and it'll all be settled. I greatly appreciate what Councillor Coburn has done. I think it's going to be to everybody's credit for years to come. And I know she'll always get a welcome in Webber and Badshot Lee. But the fact that we have the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan didn't mean it's over for them. So I just hope that some time soon, common sense will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Forashevsky.
Madam Chairman, thank you and good evening, everyone. Madam Chairman, I think it's time we move this to the vote. This is a consultation. It's a draft document. It's absolutely critical. It's live. It's evolving document. It's the duty of each and every one of us as councillors that we do all we can to try and achieve a robust plan for the borough as a whole, not just to look at where I am in Cranley or where somebody else is in Farnham, but the borough as a whole. And the only way we'll do that is to get a sound and robust plan. So it's really, really important. Now is not the time for political point scoring as well, or to be told by one member that it's unlawful. I have faith in our officers that we are here tonight discussing a document because it has been well looked at, and I have to trust that. I will be supporting this agenda item because I think we need to lead by example, get on with it, get the protection we need. And that's where the evidence is. It is actually getting the protection in those numbers. So I will be supporting the recommendations. I think we should move to the vote. This is about a draft consultation to take the views of our residents so we can look at them, apply them, and move to the next stage to give this borough all as a whole the protection it so long deserves. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Forashensky. We just have one more meeting and then the leader will be summing up. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just like to make one final point, and that's a plea to the officers. Please record the number of residents during the consultation that think this plan is breaking the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Leader, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would be delighted. I'm truly heartened by the near unanimity across the chamber. We are all realise that this is a consultation for our residents to give their opinions, and this is what we need. I can give you an undertaking that my executive will take note of the body of residents' views and, if necessary, modify the draft accordingly. Madam Mayor, I would now be happy to move to the vote. Would you like to read the recommendation, or would you like me to save your vocal cords?
Yes, please. I'd like you to save my vocal cords.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The recommendation from the executive is in two parts. I hope we could take them together. A, that the pre-submission version of Local Plan Part 2, which includes the amendment to the plans made following the recommendations of the meeting of the executive on the 6th of October 2020, attached as Annex 2 to this report, be approved for consultation under Regulation 19 of the Town and Country Planning brackets Local Planning Regulations 2012. And Part B, that the Head of Planning and Economic Development be given the authority to make any further typographical or minor formatting changes to the pre-submission version of Local Plan Part 2 that are deemed necessary for its consultation. And I'm now going to shock you all by agreeing with Councillor Hyman and requesting a recorded vote, to which I hope I have the necessary backing.
Madam Mayor, I would support that, and I think there are several others.
Happy to support.
Support. Support.
Yeah, support.
That's fine. Yes. Thank you.
Cool.
Come on, Hyman.
Could I ask the monitoring officer to carry out the roll call?
Of course, Madam Mayor. Councillors, when I call a name, please confirm whether you wish to vote for, against, or to abstain. Ryan Adams. Councillor Adams.
For.
Thank you. Christine Baker.
Gone.
I'm afraid Councillor Baker's iPad has crashed. She has just informed me. I apologise, but I think that excludes her from voting.
Thank you. David Beeman.
Definitely for.
Roger Blishin.
For.
Peter Clark.
For.
Carol Coburn.
For.
Richard Cole.
For.
Steve Cosser.
For.
Martin Darcy.
For.
Jerome Davidson.
For A and B.
Kevin Denis.
For.
Simon Deere.
4.
Sally Dixon.
4.
Brian Edmonds.
Abstain.
Patricia Ellis.
4.
David Else.
4.
Jenny Else.
4.
Jan Floyd Douglas.
4.
All follows.
4.
Mary Forojewski.
4.
Maxine Gale.
4.
Michael Goodridge.
4.
John Gray.
4.
Apologies, Councillor Gray. Could you say again, please?
Sorry, it wasn't my dog. 4.
Thank you. Michaela Gray.
4.
Joan Hegan.
4.
George Hess.
4.
Chris Howard.
4.
Jerry Hyman.
Against.
Peter Isherwood.
4.
Anna James.
4.
Jackie Keane.
4.
Robert Knowles.
Abstain.
Andy MacLeod.
4.
Penny Marriott.
4.
Peter Marriott.
4.
Michaela Martin.
4.
Peter Martin.
4.
Mark Merriweather.
4.
Kika Miralese.
4.
John Neal.
4.
Peter Nicholson.
4.
Nick Palmer.
4.
Julia Potts.
4.
Ruth Reid. Councillor Reid. Paul Rivers.
4.
Penny Rivers.
4.
John Rabini.
4.
Anne-Marie Rosamond.
4.
Trevor Sadler.
4.
Richard Seaborn.
4.
Liz Townsend.
4.
John Ward.
4.
Steve Williams.
4.
And George Wilson.
4.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Hello?
Is that Councillor Reid?
No.
Councillor
it's
Baker,
Christine
Robin.
Baker.
Oh, sorry.
Can I vote for, please? I've just managed to get through on my phone.
I've recorded that, Councillor Baker. Councillor Reid, I didn't get your vote. Okay, thank you. You're voting for. So we have 51 votes for, 1 against and 2 abstentions. So the recommendation is agreed.
Thank you. Shall we move to the amendments to the Waverley Borough Council's off-street parking order? Can I ask the leader to introduce the off-street parking order?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I propose to say very little by way of introduction to this. I'm going to hope this is not a particularly controversial item, so I will, with your indulgence, ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Palmer, to introduce it. Thank you very much.
This was announced previously and put out to consultation. There were no objections at all. If councillors wish, I can read aloud the 75 pages of the proposals, but they are quite uncontroversial, and I would like to recommend that the executive approves them.
Are there any speakers on this matter? No. Oh, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Hyman?
Sorry, I'm muted myself again. I'd just like to ask, if I may, if we can ensure that officers have the authority to go through the documents. If you look at, well, from pages 308 on, really, some of these pages, there's a headline on one side and then nothing, very little on the next page. We could make this an awful lot shorter if it were were formatted properly. We find a lot of the articles have got don't have brackets. Other ones do have brackets around them. Then we have the sub clauses. Some of them have brackets, some have ones, some have A's and B's, and the whole thing just needs to be run through from that page forward, and also the tables in order to make it fit onto as few pages as possible, because it is a very lengthy document, just to make it readable. I mean, if you look at page 324, you'll see there are boxes missing and all higgledy-piggledy, and the box sizes are all haywire, and there's spare spaces in lots of them. So, you know, rather than go through the typos and whatever in detail too, I'd be happy to speak to officers about the things that I've picked up. But somebody should have read this before it came in front of us. It seems they didn't, and fortunately, I mean, I think it's good in what it's added in there. I see that it's added in the electric charging points, or perhaps they went through in an earlier version, which I missed. There will be an issue shortly in respect to the map of the car park in South Street in Farnham, because that's being changed in its size and shape by Crest Nicholson over the months. Apart from that, it's very sensible. It just needs to be formatted and some minor bits looked at. It needs to be read through. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Anyone else who wishes to speak? Councillor Palmer.
Yes, I'm grateful to Councillor Hyman for the editorial corrections. I think it'd be particularly helpful if he can draw the attention of officers to them when he sees them, rather than in full council meeting, but keep in mind. It's possibly a good opportunity to remind everyone that you do have the option to get material online if you'd rather not get hundreds of pages of documentation. We all say that we support the climate emergency approach. This is perhaps an opportunity to follow it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? No, in that case, could I ask the leaders to sum up, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very little to say. Council are aware of my enthusiasm, determination, almost fetish for recorded voting. However, on this instance, Madam Mayor, if you would be content, I would be quite delighted if anyone against the motion just showed, and we did it by acclamation.
In that case, can we ask if there is anyone who wishes to vote against?
I think your iPad's going mad.
Sorry? No?
No. No.
So in that case, otherwise, members, would you unmute your microphone and indicate your agreement, please?
Agreed.
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 I think that is carried. Then 9.3, pesticides policy and action plan. Leader, would you like to introduce this plan, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I don't think this needs a long introduction from me either, so with your indulgence, I will throw it straight to the portfolio holder, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm delighted to be able to present this Pesticides Policy and Action Plan to members for adoption by this Council. This is building on a considerable amount of hard work by the Parks and Countryside team, and I would like to thank officers not only for that hard work, but also for their commitment to changing our working practices and how we manage land under our control. And I'd also like to thank the Environment Portfolio holder, Councillor Steve Williams, for all his contributions as well. This policy is an important part of our Climate Change Action Plan and has been formed against a growing movement to halt the use of pesticides, both from our residents, but also nationally and indeed across the world. As well as health implications, the wide use of pesticides is an important contributor to seriously declining bee numbers, as well as declining butterflies, birds, and other wildlife as well. And we're also far more aware now of the complexity and delicate balance of our soil biodiversity and the threats to that from the use of pesticides, which are far-ranging. This policy and action plan seeks to phase out the use of pesticides except in exceptional and defined circumstances within 3 years. And these documents form a major pledge by this Council. This is a living document and that will need to adapt to changes in legislation and in line with developments of new products and innovation in this field. As I mentioned in my opening, we have already actually been making some significant steps over the past year to reduce our use of pesticides. We've stopped spraying in 54 playgrounds across the borough, 5 skate parks and 7 multi-use games areas. And we've also been reducing and delaying grass cutting to encourage the range and variety of wildflowers. Members may have heard before that we've actually carried out some initial trials to identify the most effective alternative methods and treatments to control weeds. We've been focusing at the moment on areas where we control weeds on behalf of Surrey County Council on the road network. And this is an area where the highest volumes of glyphosate are used. Although we have actually reduced down spraying from 2 occasions last year to only 1 spray this year. We also plan to extend these trials over next year and the year after. We've also recently met with a representative from Natural England to discuss alternative methods of control of vegetation on land that we manage for conservation. This pesticides policy and action plan is part of a suite of policies for this council, and we've already embarked as well on the writing of a biodiversity policy as well as a tree and woodland management policy. All these policies will come together to formalise much of what we do already, but also sets further targets for protection and enhancement of biodiversity, in addition to tree planting and tree management all across the borough. This pesticides policy and action plan is an extremely positive step forward for both our residents and for our environment. It's a new way of working, but one with a clear commitment to a more sustainable future. And I hope that members will join me in supporting it tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. I have Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a real delight to me that we now have an opportunity to formally approve the policy that was presented to Executive on the 6th of October. A policy that Councillor Liz Townsend has worked really extremely hard on and has spent so much time developing and refining along with the Green Spaces team over the summer. One of my first commitments that I made as a portfolio holder for environment and sustainability was that we would become a pesticide-free borough, banning pesticide use in all but exceptional circumstances. And this policy was developed because, not because of my concerns or because of the executive's concerns or councillors' concerns, but because of the concerns shared by so many people in our community, in our borough, over the likely effects of pesticide use, including the now extensive use, sadly, of glyphosate. And apart from the proven danger to humans, we are talking about a significant impact on biodiversity loss at a time when only weeks ago, David Attenborough warned us that we now have 1 million species at risk of extinction. The stated aim of the policy is to start the process of reducing pesticide usage wherever possible, with an ultimate goal of phasing it out completely other than in exceptional circumstances. And make no mistake that it seems a simple thing to do, but the phasing out of pesticides is a big job. Waverley needs to phase out pesticide use on its own land, on the variety of pieces of land that it is responsible for. It needs to persuade others for whom we are the contractors that we can do an effective and sustainable job without pesticides. And we need to be exhorting others in our wider Waverley community to desist in their use of pesticides. Now, the Pesticides Action Network has experience of working with many councils on this, and we have worked closely with them. We will continue to do so. And it's interesting that in a document on how councils should go about doing this, they state, and I quote, "The journey towards becoming pesticides free requires a phased approach under which pesticide use is gradually but steadily reduced until it is eventually stopped entirely. The time frame can vary according to circumstances, but in general, a 3-year phase-out period is realistic for most councils. Through this policy, we are committed to a 3-year plan to phase out pesticide use, and I would also urge councillors to support this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Jenny Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is indeed an important and worthy consideration for the council. In fact, I'm sorry to say it's too important for us to be able to make a judgment on without a much more defined, evidence-based presentation. Its aim is to discontinue use of glyphosate and all pesticides on Waverley-owned land or property. The document plays lip service on several occasions throughout to impact on residents when the streets are weed strewn. References to communicating the reasons for the change to land management presuppose that the community will support and accept without question the council's approach if this is adopted. It is presented in a very emotive and impractical way. Glyphosate was first registered in 1974 and is now the most widely used pesticide in the world. It is a systemic herbicide of excellent efficacy, and its main benefit is that it kills virtually all weeds, although it is accepted that we don't want to kill all weeds. To find an alternative is a long haul. We're informed in this document that several other UK authorities and European cities have taken this route, and that Paris hasn't used it at all for 10 years. Do we know and understand the methods they have used? Because if so, they're not included in our policy. There is scientific evidence that it's of a very low toxicity, both to humans and to wildlife. Please, can we be told of any scientific evidence advising that this is not the case? There are no requirements for PPE in its registered use. It's worth noting that all substances are to some extent toxic. Where is the scientific evidence so that we can consider its dangers properly? We do not want weeds growing in the roads or on the footway. We do not want weeds growing in amongst crops or cultivated plants. We do not want certain weeds growing where livestock can eat them. We do not want rats in our homes. nor bed bugs, nor fleas or wasps, etc. But the possible alternative methods are not only uncosted either for the product or for the extra manual input required, they're undecided and unidentified. The potential alternative methods of pest control listed here are described as less effective, less convenient, and more expensive, an ethos which is embedded in this proposed policy. This is trying to deliver a policy before a full evaluation of the situation has been carried out, and it says so on page 397. We see throughout the document the words possibly and further work. Some of the alternative methods mentioned may even be more environmentally damaging and/or a greater danger to operators. Mechanical treatment is expensive and less ecologically sustainable, in fact. More air pollution and mechanical damage to soil, etc. I find it so disappointing that over a year since councillors unanimously declared a climate emergency, we are still being presented with a proposed policy that is full of conjecture and wishes, but no definitive answers. Just another wish list with no solutions and no scientific evidence to support it. I'm afraid I get a bit nervous when I see words like possibly and likelihood in a policy, which leads me to question its validity. Does Waverley Borough Council have access to scientific information not currently available to the UK Pesticide Registration Authority, which continues to approve the use of glyphosate? And then there is the question which needs to be asked by us all. At this challenging time, when public spirit is low and budgets hugely compromised and the immediate future uncertain, considering that this product has been in use for over 46 years, is it necessarily urgent to even bring this matter to this council right now? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Else. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now, I welcome the opportunity to discuss the draft policy today, and I have no trouble in supporting the aspirations of the policy. The reduction in the use of pesticides is a journey that the world has been on for many years, and aiming to remove their use on Waverley estate wherever viable seems entirely reasonable and sensible. But unfortunately, by combining policy, the what and why, which is principally a member responsibility, with procedures and plan, the how, who and when, which is principally an officer responsibility, the document in front of us today has become confused. The approval cycles should be different. Policy should typically be agreed once per administration and approved by council. Plans should be approved typically on an annual basis, and this can be done by executive or even delegated authority. The levels of flexibility between policy and plans are different. Policy should be relatively fixed and respond only to changes in administration, new legislation, and major scientific advances. Plans and procedures, on the other hand, should be living documents, updated to capture changing circumstances, such as budget constraints and the results of trials. The plan before us is inadequately costed for any responsible member to approve as it stands. While each action item has a wide indicative cost range assigned to it, I have no idea whether we're being asked to agree to a plan which decreases cost, is cost neutral, or requires a significant increase over our existing pest control spend. I appreciate that spend in future years may depend on the outcome of trials, but the change in spend as a result of adoption of this policy should at least be estimated for the rest of this year and for 2021 to 22, so that we know what we're actually committing to. The plan doesn't set out how resident perception of changes in the level of tidiness of green areas will be measured. The plan presents multiple options for most of the action items, but it does not actually set out the preferred option or if multiple options are going to be tested. So my request is that the documentation be split and brought back to council at the earliest opportunity, with the policy and plans presented as separate documents with different approval cycles and approving entities, and the plan broken out into actions by year with a firm budget for year one and indicative costs for subsequent years. Do something along these lines and I will certainly be able to approve the policy and probably the plan. but as it stands, I cannot support this document. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Could I have Councillor Goodrich, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have to say that I'm unhappy with the policy. I'm very happy with the idea that we should use less pesticides. The moral situation is quite clear. I'm very happy with it. The definition of pesticides is far-reaching on page 387. However, the policy is full of limited range of alternatives. Further work will be required in due course, whenever that is, to identify and evaluate alternatives. Alternative methods are not currently available, practical, acceptable, or effective. And so there's a great deal of unknown quantities. It's like saying we will abolish the COVID virus by Christmas, implying that we will have a vaccination by a certain date. There doesn't seem to be alternatives that are mentioned in this policy. And without alternatives, I'm not sure how one can, in a fixed period of 3 years, eliminate pesticides subject to some exceptions. Now, the list of instances, which are the exception list, start at page 390 and seem to be very extensive. And therefore, it's great in principle, but in practice, I'm not sure how it's going to work. And then there's the expense. I mean, it's quite clear this is going to be more expensive than is currently the case. Everywhere it says may be more expensive, technology not proven, large amount of labor may be required, which will be expensive. It may cost more. And therefore, I agree with Councillor Seaborn that we really do need some indication in each financial year of the cost. But I can see the problem that the administration has. If they don't know what the alternatives are, they don't know the cost of it. And therefore, it seems to me that the matter is generally premature. I have to say, because I agree in the principle of it, I'm likely to abstain, which I've very rarely done in my council career. But on this case, I mean, I'm not against the policy. On the other hand, I'm not in favour of the policy in its current form. If we are going to rewrite the policy, can I just suggest that we get the punctuation right? I'm not going to do a Councillor Hyman, but there's an awful lot of semicolons instead of commas, but we can deal with that on another occasion. I make no point about that. But so I feel, Madam Mayor, that this is in its current form not acceptable, and for the reasons. But if the portfolio holder can tell me what it's going to cost and how it's going to cost and what the alternatives are, rather than we don't know yet, I might change my mind. But at the moment, I can't support it, but will abstain. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Costa.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Can I just start by saying that, like some of my colleagues who've already spoken, I would want to make clear, firstly, that I absolutely accept that as a council, it's entirely right and proper. We should see if it is possible to eliminate those pesticides and herbicides whose use is causing damage to wildlife and insect pollinators and so forth. However, I don't think that what we really got in front of us this evening really addresses that need properly. I think we've got effectively a document in two parts, and I think it's got two purposes. And I think Councillor Williams rather gave the game away a little bit in what he said earlier. I think it's clear
that the administration, Councillor Williams obviously personally, because he said so, has always wanted to be able to make a public commitment that Waverley will be eliminating the use of pesticides. And I thought it quite significant that it wasn't very long after the executive meeting that a statement like that was already out there on social media, even before it had gone to the council. However, I think as a council, we've actually got a right to understand how realistic this is, and as some others who have spoken have said, it's one of those instances, yet again, we keep getting in this council, where we don't actually work out how, whether we can do something properly before we actually make the policy statement. And if you look at the document very carefully, and I'd refer you initially, I'm just trying to look up the page numbers again, to Appendix 2, pages 408 to 411 in the council agenda, we have a massive long list of what our existing policies are, what we might want to do in the future, then a whole series of options. It doesn't say what options we might adopt. And you know, if you read it carefully, it's quite clear that in some cases, we're pretty much accepting that we aren't in a position to eliminate the use of pesticides. In others, it does suggest we might use alternatives, and then in brackets says there are no chemical alternatives available at the present time. And in the costs column, even more crazy, it seems to me, is that we've just got a whole list of potential costs that are quite meaningless because we don't even know what option we are going to adopt. My view, my prediction, and I would love to be proved wrong on this, but I think the executive has got to do a lot more if they're going to prove me wrong. My prediction is that this is going to cost the council more. The weed treatments are going to be less effective, causing significant concern to our residents. Residents complaints will increase. And I don't think it will be at all popular in the way that has been suggested. It's certainly my experience in 13 years in my ward that I get quite a lot of complaints from people about ineffective weed and herbicide treatments and so on. And I think that's what's going to happen. If the executive are going to convince me otherwise, then what I'd like to know is what are their plans for monitoring all of this? It talks about monitoring it, but I can't see the monitoring plans. How are we going to monitor the effectiveness? How are we going to monitor the residents' complaints? And how are we going to look at the costs on this? Is that all going to be brought together? Is it going to happen? And when is it going to come back to this council so we can make a proper judgment about whether this really is effective as a policy or not? Like a lot of my colleagues, I can't go against the principle, and I wouldn't want to, but I absolutely can't support what's been put in front of us this evening, and therefore will abstain. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. Councillor Follows.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'll just pick up on a number of items from members of the opposition, if I may. I do find it interesting to be told by members of the same group that we're simultaneously moving too quickly and too slowly on the same subject. That's always quite fun. Many of us argued to promote such policies when we stood for election. And so I take that as a mandate to do that now and to pursue that. And I see many members happy with the idea, morally speaking, but to do something about it, well, that's just another matter. That's a step too far, isn't it? Policies can be, and often are, and should be, a statement of intent and a call to action. They're a driver to pursue the change that you want. I think realistically here, we might be accused of putting the cart before the horse, but sometimes you need to actually, you know, define that there's a cart on a horse before you even start doing some work. And this is doing that. Many complaints from residents about weeds. I totally get that. Roughly even split for me of the residents complaining we aren't doing enough weeding and residents who are complaining that we're doing weeding with glyphosates and other chemicals. If I'm going to side with one group of residents over the other, I'm going to side with the ones who are trying to do the right thing, not just trying to keep it clean and tidy. I think we can keep it clean and tidy whilst using more reasonable methods as well. And obviously we'll continue to listen to residents as part of our engagement process once this is going. If we just look at PPE, I mean, much of that's going to be down to the contractor, but let's be brutally honest here, these things have to be allowed under the Control of Hazardous Substances Act, which through its risk assessments determine which PPE is going to be used. We are not going to sit here and define that in our policy. That's just ridiculous. We're not going to do that. As to expense, it's pretty clear that the market is shifting generally on this, and it's shifting pretty quickly. It's got cheaper over time. It is going to continue to do that. Expressing an economic language that's more appropriate to the opposition. The market is driving this in this way as much as any other factor. The cost will go down because people want to do this. Current policy commits to that local evaluation of those options, and I'm quite happy for it to do that. And if I may take the political moment here to conclude, not being populist as we are as an administration, we want to do the right thing, even if it's not universally popular. That's actually why we're elected. Sometimes the right thing to do is not always the most popular thing to do, something which our own government, I think, could take a bit of a lesson from. And we're here to do our best for residents. I would remind several opposition councillors that almost certainly, and we all know this, I mean, some people are going to sit here and deny otherwise, that had your party won the election, we wouldn't be having this discussion at all, because you never would have brought it forward at any point in any substance at all. So I'm seeing here some stalling tactics. I'm seeing here some opposition to it, which you don't want to say. You don't want to be on the record of being against it. I get that. That's fair enough. But the argument that, you know, if something's been done for 45 years as a reason to justify continuing doing something now is absolutely risible. So I wholeheartedly support this policy. The intention behind it. Why we're here. So, the officers for getting this to us.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I have a whole raft of other people now. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. A policy is, of course, a course of action, not a list of possibles. You know, if we are going to start looking at semantics, can we at least get the word correct, please? I'm going to support this. You know, instinctively I support it. But I have to say, you know, I do agree with a lot of what has been said. And I'm getting a little bit used to these living documents, which are 101 sort of possibles, but I would prefer a proper policy, I have to be honest. I would say, if I had to list them, the three things that I get asked about are planning, bins, and then weeds. I mean, people do not like weeds. We had an enormous one. I don't know whether Councillor Blisham will remember it. It was growing at the crossroads at Frensham Road, at the traffic lights of Frensham Road, Great Austins, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew, this enormous great thing, like something out of a fairy tale. And I just got phone call and email. People were just really up in arms about this thing. And in the end, I tried all the usual channels. That got me nowhere. So one Sunday, I just parked the car and went to pull it up. Could I pull it up? Could I? Heck, you know, it was absolutely stuck. Fortunately, just like the Great Enormous Turnip, those grandparents who are reading that now, or parents pulling up the Great Enormous Turnip, we ended up with 4 of us. We didn't have the dog on the end, I won't go that far, but 4 of us to get that blooming weed up. But I got as many thank yous for that weed as I've done for all the other things I've done. So, you know, not everybody loves a weed if it's sort of in the wrong place. And I actually don't think we should educate people. I think that's so what should we say, pompous. You know, people have different views, and certainly in terms of street cleaning, people want neat gutters. They don't want weeds growing along their roads. And we've had 2 or 3 years back, we had sort of forests growing in the gutters. It was just that combination of weather. I also don't think that Waverley is actually raising the bar here. I mean, what's been going on in all sorts of communities is far ahead of this. Not in terms perhaps of not using glyphosate, but in terms of wildflowers and not cutting. I mean, we've been doing this for years in Farnham and Bloom. We've been doing it in our cemeteries, and I'm sure that's replicated across the borough. You know, people are coming round to wanting, even in our tubs that we do at the Bourne Crossroads, we put in pollinators. We want to see the bees and the butterflies, but there's a little bit of green that goes along, a verge, and people want that cut. And, you know, it's a balance, isn't it, with all of these things? So, like everybody else, I am worried about the amount of money this is going to cost. I know that the town council is worried because the alternative of hand weeding in the borough, as you can imagine the amount of cost that would be, or of putting in an alternative that perhaps is a quarter as effective, and then you have to go back 3 more times to do it. I mean, it doesn't make any sense financially. So although I am all for this in the general terms, I would like better policies. I'd like them better written, and I would like a course of action, not a scattergun approach to policy, which we seem to get. There is a Farnham biodiversity plan being written, so I hope that will tie in with whatever Waverley is doing. I hope you are talking to the towns and parishes to get it all in. So on the whole, I support this, but I do wish for a little more clarity, a little more organisation in documents. I am finding them incredibly difficult to support. Instinctively, I want to, but when I read them, there's so many questions that keep coming up because of the way they are, you know, on the one hand, on the other hand, a list of this and nothing definite. You know, you can accuse us of all sorts of things, Councillor Follows, but you can't accuse me of not calling a spade a spade. And if I do a policy, it will be a policy. And that is what I intend people to do. And so, you know, I find it very, very difficult when, to me, a policy is, as I say, a wish list. It's not what I would do. But the idea behind this is exactly what I would support. And I hope the borough will come behind us and support us. But don't tell us we've got to educate these poor people. They will be educated if what we're doing is the right thing. We just show what we're trying to do. And if people come with us, that's fine. If they still want us to kill those weeds along their wall, then we should be doing that as well. I'm sorry, we are here to serve everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Councillor Palmer? Oh, Councillor Hyman, sorry. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. I thank the previous speakers for saving me from having to say quite a lot of things in this respect. I do think that this is certainly a step in the right direction. It's a first step, an indication, as Councillor Seaborn said, of aspirations, and I fully support it in that respect. Though, like he does, I have some reservations as to perhaps how far we've got before getting it in front of the full council at this stage. We're doing what we can. It's perhaps a shame that we can't force others to do something, but the council can start and lead locally in this respect, and hope that other authorities and private companies will follow suit. I'm slightly surprised. Some residents, I think, watching this might have thought I was the only member who was concerned about biodiversity and the million species that are at risk of extinction. But it's nice that everybody else seems to care in this respect. So that's a bit of a change around in the space of half an hour or so, isn't it? Councillor Goodrich is absolutely right, I think, and I do hope the executive and the officers will listen to what's been said rather than perhaps simply dismiss it as politicking, which is very easy to do. I think the test of any councillor and any proposal really is what we would say if we were reading it and we were in opposition. And I can't really pretend that I wouldn't have said much different to what some of the previous speakers have said, but I'll leave it at that. I fully support the direction we're headed in. I think it's the right thing to do, certainly, and I would urge others to support it, but you know, there is work to be done for us to take this forward, and there's more work to be done. I thank Councillor Townsend for everything she's done. I know how difficult it is to get anything done in, you know, whilst we're in the middle of COVID. And I would absolutely support the abolishing of coronavirus at Christmas. I'm fully in support of that, so you got my vote too. Thanks.
Councillor Palmer. Thank you, Councillor Hammond. Councillor Palmer.
Sorry, just unmuting. This council, like many others in Britain and across the world, has a dilemma in that there is substantial concern about intensive use of herbicides and pesticides, in particular glyphosate, both for their general impact on the environment and, in the case of glyphosate, as a substance that the WHO have said is probably carcinogenic. Now, Councillor Else argues that glyphosate may, after all, after further research, prove to be safe. And she's correct that there isn't a total unanimity of opinion on this at the moment, which is why it's still legal. And she fears that if we phase it out, we might see more weeds. And as in so many other areas of politics, we don't have perfect knowledge, but frankly, a risk of causing cancer is more serious than the risk of allowing more weeds. Now, we are not proposing to abolish weed control or to leave it to individuals to dig them up, as was so vividly evinced by Councillor Coburn. We're proposing a phase out and replacement as quickly as possible. It reflects the precautionary principle. Councillor Cossa has cited residents' concerns, and as a councillor, I've only had a single complaint about weeds from one of my predecessors, but quite a few about herbicides. And that may reflect the fact that as a Labour candidate, I was specifically elected on the promise of environmental action. But I also know many Conservatives who agree. And I very much welcome the Conservative councillors who have said tonight that they are prepared, even with reservations, to support the policy. Because ultimately, it shouldn't be a party divide whether we expose the residents of this borough to a potential carcinogenic substance. It ought to be something that we all want to phase out. Now, I do agree with the speakers who said we need to follow the success and the cost of policy, but it's also important to remember that inaction also has costs, potentially health costs and potentially other costs on the environment. There's a tendency in some quarters to favour a climate emergency policy in general, but to oppose any specific action on the grounds that we've done something else up to now and it's too risky to experiment. Nonetheless, I think the precautionary principle totally justifies this policy. We should keep it under review. We should look at the research as it evolves. We should look at the experience of other councils, but we should not sit and do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Could I just have a moment to discuss the adjournment of this meeting? We are coming up to 22:10. The council meeting, which would normally finish at 10. There are a number of speakers of this, as well as the rest of the agenda. Could I suggest that we continue the meeting until the council has concluded the agenda? In other words, carry on with this meeting until the agenda is complete. Would you like to unmute? Would you like to unmute and
Agreed.
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 Reluctantly.
Thank you. In that case, can I now call on who will we have next? Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In view of the timing, I'll try and be brief and not repeat, but I would say to Councillor Follows that I don't believe it's political to question papers when they come forward. I don't believe it's political to raise questions on cost. I think the question of cost is actually within the paper, where it says we don't know the cost, not that we're going to evaluate the costs and to identify the costs. It says we don't know the costs. And I do think that's really a negative in terms of endorsing this in terms of a plan. But I do totally support that we undertake some trials. We undertake some physical experiences that we can report back to this council and say what works and what doesn't work, what is right for the residents of Waverley. I mean, I haven't had any complaints on weeds, probably because we don't have that many weeds, because there is a regime at the moment. I think the other thing about weeds is some people's weeds are other people's flowers. I do get picked up from my wife when I pull up the wrong thing. But not making light of this, we should endorse what Councillor Townsend is trying to do with basically identifying areas where we can put our ideas into practice. Trial and report is how I would view it. I think the policy side of it, if it's split out from the action plan, I don't think that many of us would actually disagree. It's an aspiration. It's a good thing to try for. But the one other thing I would ask Councillor Townsend is, can we please harness more support for this? Can we please get, let's repeat the listening panel. Let's say this is where we'd like to go. Let's invite in the farmers, the equestrian people, those people who have open gardens, other people who have it, including, I think, the Farnham Town Council, who seem to have the answers to some of this. Perhaps, you know, we could have something that gives us a wider perspective, because we can only do so much with our own controlled land. If we really want to go down this route and get Waverley known for taking, I think, what was it, a leap of faith almost, I think, although Councillor Follows didn't use those words. But I do think that we should consult wider on that and get some of these other people involved. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will stop there. I do have a few more points, but I'll stop with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor George Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I turned to page 408 and read pesticide policy. Production of an overall pesticide policy for the council that seeks to reduce and phase out pesticides wherever possible. That to me says this is a living document, that it is a first step and it is something that we should do. So I firmly support this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And lastly, Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I just remind everybody that this is only in relation to council-owned land, and I don't think we own any farms or equestrian facilities, so it is about Waverley property. And let's look at why this has been put forward. There have been a number of cases linking glyphosate to cancer. There have been a huge slew of cases in the States, and they're ongoing, and it is very ongoing. There have also been cases in Europe, and there are some cases currently pending in England. What I'm asking myself is, if I had younger children, which I don't have anymore, or if I had grandchildren, would I be happy to have them playing in a playground where this pesticide has been used? And I would not be willing to take that risk with this carcinogenic threat behind it. As a councillor, on the same day I received a complaint from a resident about weeds in a pathway near her house, I received another complaint from the neighbour next door who said, "Why did you cut down those weeds? They attract butterflies." So we're never going to please everybody all of the time. And I think lots of residents have contacted me during lockdown to say how wonderful it looks with the flowers growing by the highways. You know, they've said it's that we've gone back to nature. We don't hear aeroplanes. We see butterflies. We see life growing in the plants. And even the government have indicated that post-Brexit, they would be they could be minded, wording right, to take a different approach from the EU in not continuing the use of these pesticides. So it's not something coming from left field. There's a lot of people talking about it. And let's face it, if things haven't changed, we'd still be putting children up chimneys and working in factories. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rosamond. Councillor Rubini.
It's Councillor Keane.
Oh, Councillor Keane.
Yeah. Well, I have listened to the debate, and I'm pleased to say that parts of Hazelmere are taking part in these trials. And it is a trial because until it's been, the alternatives have been used for a while, we won't know what the result is. But like Councillor Rosamond, I was unhappy to take my children to parks when they'd just been sprayed because of the effects on children's health or anybody's health. And also, I think, given the millions of gardens that we've got in our borough, across the country even, you know, Waverley's showing the way to their residents that we want to get rid of pesticides and especially glyphosate. And if we can show our residents that we're serious about this, perhaps it might encourage them to do the same. So therefore, we are doing a great deal for our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Councillor Leader, can I ask you to sum up?
Yes, indeed, Madam Mayor. Well, that was exciting. I didn't expect it to take more time than LPP2, but you never can predict a thing when you walk into a meeting. But at least we've had a sensible debate, and we've had strongly held views from all sides, for which I appreciate everything. I was rather hoping this would go through by acclamation, because it is the first imperfect steps. But I'm afraid mean old leader is going to revert to type and ask, please, for a recorded vote on the recommendation that this council adopts the pesticides policy and action plan. And I'm sure I have 5 people willing to support me.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
Can I ask the monitoring officer to carry out the roll call?
Yes, of course, Madam Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, please confirm if you wish to vote for, vote against or abstain. Brian Adams.
Against.
Christine Baker. Councillor Baker.
Councillor Baker is on the phone and her phone is muted. She may not be able to unmute.
Okay, I'll come back to Councillor Baker. David Beeman.
For.
Roger Blishin.
For.
Peter Clark.
Or.
Carol Coburn.
For.
Richard Cole.
For.
Steve Cosser.
Abstain.
Martin Darcy.
For.
Jerome Davidson.
For.
Kevin Denis.
Abstain.
Simon Deere.
Against.
Sally Dixon.
For.
Brian Edmonds.
For.
Patricia Ellis.
For.
David Else.
Abstain.
Jenny Else.
Abstain.
Jan Floyd Douglas.
For.
All follows.
For.
Mary Forojewski.
For.
Maxine Gale.
For.
Michael Goodridge.
Abstain.
John Gray.
Abstain.
Michaela Gray.
For.
Joan Hegan.
For.
George Hess.
For.
Chris Howard.
For.
Jerry Hyman.
For.
Peter Isherwood.
For.
Anna James.
Abstain.
Jackie Keane.
For.
Was that 4?
Yeah, for.
Robert Knowles.
Abstain.
Andy MacLeod.
For.
Penny Marriott.
For.
Peter Marriott.
For.
Michaela Martin.
For.
Peter Martin.
Abstain.
Mark Merriweather.
4.
Kika Miralise.
4.
John Neal.
4.
Peter Nicholson. Councillor Nicholson.
He gone.
Nick Palmer.
4.
Julia Potts.
Gone.
Councillor Potts. Ruth Reid. Councillor Reid. Yep, you've indicated 4 by putting a thumb up. Thank you. Paul Rivers.
4.
Penny Rivers.
4.
John Rubini.
4.
Anne-Marie Rosamond.
4.
Trevor Sadler.
Abstain.
Richard Seaborn.
Abstain.
Liz Townsend.
4.
John Ward.
4.
Steve Williams.
4.
George Wilson.
4.
Thank you.
Councillor Craig votes 4.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Councillor Baker, Robin.
Councillor Baker is voting 4.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I'm just going to check who we've missed. Do I have Julia Potts' vote?
I think she left. I think I saw a sign saying she'd left, Robin.
Okay. And Peter Nicholson.
There was a message, Robin, from Councillor Potts saying that her internet had gone down.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Knowles. Yeah. Is Peter Nicholson still on the line? I'm just trying to look at who's still here. Can't see Peter Nicholson. Okay, well, at the moment, Madam Mayor, we have 39 votes for, 2 against, and 11 abstentions.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. It would appear that the motion is carried. The recommendation is carried that the council approve the making of a Waverley, the council adopts the pesticides policy and action plan. Thank you. Leader, would you like to continue?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. That concludes the part 1 items of the executive minutes. There are no speakers notified to me in part 2 of either the September or October minutes. So I would therefore ask that Council receive and note the executive minutes. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Right, members, could you unmute your microphone to confirm agreement?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed. Now, we only have 2 very short, no, we don't. We have 1 very short one and then the last one. We should finish by 10:30. Right. We'll move on to the audit committee meetings, minutes. Councillor Marriott, would you like to present the minutes of the audit committee meeting?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The minutes of the audit committee meeting held on 14th September 2020 are included in the agenda pack at pages 413 to 420. I'm pleased to move that the minutes be received and noted. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Davidson, I move to support that.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. You'll be very pleased to know that my presentation is very brief. There are no part 1 matters to discuss and no member has registered to speak on part 2 matters. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That concludes my presentation.
Could I ask the council to agree to receive and note the minutes?
Agreed.
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 Right, thank you. Now, 11, the Standards Committee minutes. Councillor Ravini, would you like to present these, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could present the minutes of the Standards Committee meeting held on the 5th of October 2020. If I could have those received and noted, I believe I have got a seconder.
Happy to second, Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you. Can we agree those minutes, please?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. Now, the recommendation is that we in view of the latest guidance on use of council building. Sorry, I've got lost. Here we are. In view of the latest guidance on use of the council building, the general tightening of COVID-19 precautions until March 2021. Current arrangements for the Eastern and Western Planning Committee continue to the end of the council year on the 7th of May 2021, therefore extending our present system to the end of the council year. Have we any speakers?
That's just, oh, that was just agree.
Have we any hand? I can't see on my machine.
No. Councillor Beeman wants to make a statement, but perhaps at a... Does anybody else wish to speak first? No, there are no hands up here, Councillor Ravini. So shall we ask Councillor Beeman, would you like to make a statement?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't want to prolong this, but I feel I want to make a statement regarding, I may no longer be a member of the executive, but I am the chair of the Western Area Planning Committee. And I'd like to make the following statements because I want to correct inaccurate and misleading statements made by Councillor Hyman as a member of Waverley Borough Council Standards Committee during its meeting held on the 5th of October. I won't take too long. The debate, which included discussion of the use of breakout rooms in meetings of planning committees, to draft alternative recommendations when committees do not support the recommendations of planning officers. During the debate, Councillor Hyman made statements which I consider to be both inaccurate and misleading. Since these are formally recorded on the webcast, I would like to use this opportunity to correct the record. When debating the protocol for the use of breakout rooms, Councillor Hyman requested that any protocol needed to be brought back to the Standards Committee for agreement. That I do not disagree, but he then went on to say, and I quote him, "I don't think that the chairman will particularly care if it is lawful or proper what is done there, going by what they've done so far." In response, Councillor Rubini, as the chair, responded he had faith in the two planning committee chairmen, that's myself and Richard Cole, and Councillor Cole. And then Councillor went on to say, history proves otherwise, we represent the residents. These are minutes 63 to 65 of the webcast. Not being a member of the Standards Committee, I was unable to correct the misrepresentation at the time, but as chair of Western Area Planning Committee, I am very concerned that Councillor Hyman knowingly made a statement that totally misrepresented my views and opinions on the use of breakout rooms. I can assure everybody, councillors, officers, and particularly residents, that I personally do not support breakout rooms. I made these views quite clear when at the meeting of the Western Planning Committee on the 1st of September, when there was an attempt to make use a breakout room that ended in technical breakdown. But I don't believe breakout rooms should ever be used. I also gave a personal undertaking that so long as I remained chair of the Western Planning Committee, there would be no breakout rooms. Councillor Hyman was fully aware of this, he was present at the meeting and did personally intervene, even though being an observer he had no right to do so. I believe that Councillor Hyman, who is always so emphatic that the truth should always be told, knowingly made inaccurate statements which represent my own stated views and opinions made in public, at which Councillor Hyman was present regarding the use of breakout rooms. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. There should be no discussion on this unless anyone wishes to make a point of personal explanation.
Can I make a point of order, Madam Mayor? Councillor Goodridge here.
Yes.
The minutes of the Standards Committee don't identify part 1 and part 2 items. The item that Councillor Beeman was speaking on is a part 1 item because it's a recommendation to the council. We ought to be dealing with that as a recommendation because that is the only item I think that is actually a part 1 item. The rest are part 2 items. I just want to raise that.
Yes, and I was going to move on.
I would like to make a point of personal explanation, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman.
As just to say that I had a great deal of difficulty in following entirely what Councillor Beeman has said, but it may be clearer if I watch it back on the webcast. But I do think that he misinterpreted what I said at the meeting that he refers to, because I don't think I was referring to the issue of the breakout room. I think I was referring to a previous item that had been considered. So, but I'll take that up outside of the meeting. I don't think there's anything to squabble about here in this meeting, and certainly not at this point in this meeting, as Councillor Goodridge has said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Rubini, can I ask you to sum up on your recommendation?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. On the 9th of June 2020, the Council adopted virtual meeting procedure rules in line with the regulations for remote attendance at meetings, which came into effect on the 4th of April 2020. This meeting on 21st of May 2020, the Standards Committee agreed to review the experience of holding virtual committee meetings with remote attendance by members and officers, and to make recommendations on changes to the virtual meeting procedure rules, if necessary, in the light of experience. The Standards Committee also agreed to review the temporary arrangements to the planning committees introduced to simplify the committee arrangements whilst holding virtual meetings. So the recommendation to continue this is in front of you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Rubini, you asking for a recorded vote?
Yep. Would you like a recorded vote? Yes, I can ask for a recorded vote. Can I have 5 others?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, could I ask the monitoring officer wishes to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. It was just to pick up on Councillor Goodridge's point, which was correct. So there is a recommendation.
Just about finished. Yeah.
There is a recommendation.
Yeah.
There is a recommendation here before council, so it's open to all members to debate. So I just wish to be clear that if any member does want to contribute to that debate before it goes to the vote, then obviously they're entitled to do so. Thank you.
Does any member wish to speak? Oh, Councillor Forochevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's all getting a little bit confusing. I take it we are allowed to debate the recommendation 11.1?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, I would like to say that I am quite disappointed to see that we are going to be waiting till May next year to continue with the way we currently operate. I know things are difficult and I know this is challenging times for everybody, but I would like to see that we lead by example going forward, and that we're at some point, and God only knows when, we try to get back to some form of normality, because the way the system is at the moment, it isn't the best it could be. And I think to sort of say that we're going to have to wait till May 21 is leaving it too long. I think there may be opportunities or changes between now and then that would allow us to resume some normality and get back into the offices and do what we can to sort of put a bit of normality back into everybody's life. I know that is a very outrageous thing to say given the current climate, but at the end of the day, COVID's going nowhere. It's here to stay. We've got to live with it. We've got to manage it. So it's high time we found other ways of looking at how we're going to complete our operations without just going down this particular route. So thank you for your indulgence, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Forochevsky. Councillor Hyman, are you speaking on the recommendation?
Yes, thank you. I'm slightly confused by what Councillor Forashevsky has said, actually, because I think the recommendation is that the arrangements for Eastern and Western continue. I don't think that that excludes us from meeting in the chamber sooner than those times. It's just a matter of the planning committee arrangements. If I could have confirmation from the monitoring officer that well, what we're saying here is that we'll keep Eastern and Western for another 6 months because of the current situation. And that we'll, that we can do exactly what Councillor Forashevsky is asking for, apart from that, and meet back in the chamber sooner if that's the sort of lead that we wish to take as a council. That's the way I'd interpreted it. So can we just have a little clarification on that? Thank you.
Monitoring officer, can you clarify that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So Councillor Hyman is correct. So the recommendation before you is with regards to the current arrangements for the Eastern and Western planning committees, and for those continuing to the end of the council year on the 7th of May 2021. So that's the recommendation, and that's what council members are to debate.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, just to quickly agree with Councillor Hyman, I mean, either we're talking about the idea of coming back into the chamber, which I think if we just accept the reality of the situation doesn't seem to be possible in the near future in any respectable way, well, in any safe way. I know officers are looking at hybrid meetings, but that's not going to take full planning committees worth of people. The alternative interpretation of what Councillor Forashevsky was talking about, from my point of view, is the resumption of 5 planning committees, which under the current circumstances would also seem quite questionable in terms of use of officers' time and efficiency's sake. So for either of those reasons, I don't think returning to the previous normal anytime soon, certainly before this recommendation says, is possible or desirable. And so, as I did in the Standards Committee, I entirely support this recommendation. It, of course, doesn't stop us doing some of the things we need to do around the edges in planning committees in terms of improving how they operate as committees, as we discussed at length in the Standards Committee. So I completely support this recommendation. As much as there are lots of things I'm sure we'd probably love to do without COVID, well, it's kind of here. So we have to deal with that and the reality of it. And this accepts that reality.
Madam Mayor, if I may, please, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, if I may. If I may, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Just to clarify what I was saying, so it's clear for all. Councillor Follows, I was in no way insinuating that we should change the makeup or go back to the way it was in terms of the committees. My issue is that we have got to accept that COVID is here to stay, and we have to manage it and we have to deal with it. I know that that's going to take an awful lot, but I am actually referring to what the recommendation says, and I'm disappointed that even for these 2 committees, they cannot resume some sort of normality. I was not talking about normality that returns to the 5 committees or go to 1 committee or whatever. I was talking specifically about the committee and the recommendation that's here, and that is what I was talking about. Thank you again, Madam Chairman. Madam Mayor.
Thank you for your clarification, Councillor Forashevsky. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, good evening. I would like to talk about, I'm obviously on the Western Planning Committee, and unfortunately I've been attending it every 2 weeks, which has been the new normal. I would like to speak out in favour of this system, because what I have noticed is that the attendance at the Western Planning, and in fact at all the committee meetings I've attended recently, has been significantly higher than it was in the good old days. And I think actually we should be looking to go forward to a better future. And what we've found is that the digital solution allows people who are a bit further away or shielding to attend meetings. And also I do question whether or not it's such a good idea to put us all back in our cars driving across the Waverley countryside to get to Godalming every Tuesday night. So I would like the officers, when it comes around to considering this, to look at the attendance figures and say, actually, there has been some good come out of this bad time that we're going through at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to say that I very much support the recommendation for the current arrangements to continue. Whilst I acknowledge, I'm sure with everybody, that it's been a challenge in going online and how quickly we had to execute that. However, I think the committees have run extremely well. We have introduced changes. There will be changes going forward, I'm sure, but the officers have also risen to the occasion and worked really hard to run the meetings as smoothly as possible. And I'm extremely aware that many of our councillors are in the sort of the more vulnerable category, and I wouldn't want to see us going back to physical meetings at this moment in time. Obviously, as the monitoring officer has said, this particular arrangement does not preclude us from holding those meetings, but I think the most important thing that I would want to see, and I think that this council as a responsible council would want to see, is that the safety of our councillors and our officers is paramount in any decision-making process. Thank you.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to agree with Councillor Hyman in what he said, and that I support the recommendation. What was quite clear at standards, if by a miracle COVID was to disappear, we of course can end this. But hearing the alarming and disappointing report of the leader on the current situation at the start of this meeting, I would hate to see any meetings in the council buildings, certainly in the forthcoming months, because it's quite clear this isn't going away. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. Councillor Hyman, you have already spoken. Is this a point of explanation?
Not strictly speaking, although it could be a point of order saying that actually the issue of whether the number of members present is equates to quality of decision making it's not an issue for debate now. We've got the recommendation in front of us, which I think we should move to. I would agree with what Councillor Knowles has said, given the opportunity, but I was going to particularly ask, if I might, Madam Mayor, if you could save us the trouble of going through, I don't think this is controversial, I think it's straightforward housekeeping in the situation. And I would very much like it if you could spare us the trouble of going through a recorded vote, if others could agree to that, because if anybody would like to abstain or vote against, then I'm sure they could indicate now in that respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think this is where Councillor Rubini must continue his summing up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I did in fact finish the summing up of it. The Councillor Beeman went on to. All I would say is that you have the recommendation in front of you. It does seem to me fairly straightforward. The Standards Committee did thrash this out. There was very few people against it continuing, and as you've heard from the monitoring officer, if conditions change before that time, then we can change the rules. And as you heard others say, we did indeed talk about changing some of the more minor rules within the planning committee by the chairman, such as the breakout, and that's all been settled. So, can I ask for a vote, please? Monitoring officer, do you want to take it as a yes and no rather than a recorded vote?
That's up to the mayor to decide.
Madam Mayor?
No, could I ask if anybody is against this? Otherwise, we could do this by acclamation. Is there anybody who wishes to vote against?
Just me, Madam Mayor. I'm against, but that's fine.
Okay. Could you unmute your microphones and vote, please?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. That is, the recommendation is approved. Right. Could I ask if the minutes are received and noted? Is that agreed? Could you unmute your microphone?
Agreed.
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 Very thankfully, there are no matters to be considered in exempt session, and therefore the meeting is concluded.
Thank you. Good night.
Agreed.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good enough for that.
Thank you, Mayor.